Your ongoing obligation to declare interest, mobile phone switch off, and your tablet switch off to mute. Done. And today's business, we have a briefing by the Driving Instructors National Association Council on the Road Traffic Amendment Bill. The committee inquiry into wind energy. We're going to have two briefings there, one from Windwatch NI and the other one from NIRAC, the Northern Ireland Renewable Industry Group. And there are a number of SROs as well, including taxi licensing. So apologies, none yet. Okay, we moved on then. Chairperson's business, members. The permanent secretary.
Apologies, I think, from Ian Milne.
Ian Milne.
Yeah.
Okay, record that. Thank you, Barry.
I think he's at the DARD-related business. DARD.
Okay. Okay. The DOE's permanent secretary has agreed to meet us informally. We usually meet him on a regular basis, so we have arranged to meet him on Tuesday, the 4th of November. Members, at 12:30 in room 21. We'll send a email round to remind members as well. And then a light lunch will be served. Okay, so we're meeting him at about 12:30. That's Tuesday. That'll be the week we come back, isn't that, after Halloween? Yes, Tuesday, the 4th of November. Members, if you want any items to be included, okay. If you want any items to be included in the agenda for discussion, I think obviously we want to talk to him about local government subordinate legislation, a raft of them, and the time scale, and the fact that it's coming too late for us.
Chair, just to clarify, without sounding very ignorant, because I didn't quite catch the start there, is this the permanent secretary, said, or?
Permanent secretary, yes, yeah. So, Leo O'Reilly. Yes, he'll be coming. But usually he brings all his senior staff. So, yeah. Okay, members. Then there's an invitation from our research people at page 6 to make the opening remarks at the Knowledge Exchange Seminar on local government and planning on Wednesday, the 3rd of December in the Long Gallery. I did that last year, members, so are you content for me to do that again?
Yeah, far away.
Okay, yep. And also then there's a table report on the committee visit to recycling sites in Belgium and Germany. I certainly have found it very, very impressive, very informative. What do you think, other members? Sandra and Peter, Carol?
It was very good, Chair.
Yep.
Very
It was very, very good.
Very informative.
Yes, yeah. Quite impressive, wasn't it? And Peter walked all the way up to the top of the hill.
I think most of us said, I think, you're the only one.
You were the only one.
Oh, is that right?
You're the only one.
The only one that chickened out.
And a Crenshaw colleague of mine who had the sense not to actually go to the top.
I went halfway up.
I was going to the top, Anna.
Yes, true. But then I had a bad ankle, so that's my excuse. Okay. Yes. So I think it is important. I think we said a few times during the trip that we should have a follow-up meeting with the councillors. So maybe Sheila can organise that, liaise with the councillors. I think they are now thinking of this application to have something similar, maybe on a much smaller scale, in the forecourt of in North Belfast. Yeah. Okay. Pam, you all right there? Okay. Yes. Members, are you content if we send two formal letters to the various people?
We'll maybe just send a letter to Renew, because they were actually our hosts, and ask them to pass on our thanks to all the various people who spoke to us.
Yeah. Okay. Right here.
Apart from the taxi driver took us to the wrong restaurant. So thanks there.
Yes, you can tell them too. We missed a tree. Connection wasn't quite good. And thanks to Peter too.
Good job.
Well, running about,
Enjoy your visit.
trying to get new tickets. Yes, we missed the connection totally. Oh dear, it was quite stressful trying to find the right train to go on next. And not reading much German. I think Peter's not much better than me in terms of reading German. Okay, members. No, he was very gallant. He was running about. Yeah, yeah.
Chair, I don't know if you're aware of the phrase of what goes on tour stays on tour.
All right, was it one of those sort of
One of those, yeah. One of those road trips.
Yeah.
Okay, Chair.
Okay, minutes.
Just continue at this point.
Yes. Minutes at page 9. Members, are you content to agree the minutes?
Great.
Right.
Chair, can I just maybe, this point is as a minor point perhaps, but you see later on in the meeting we have the two presentations, one from the wind industry, you might say, and another from Windwatch.
Yes.
I would just ask, was there ever an issue of order of presentations? Was that ever raised with the committee prior to today? It was raised with me informally. I didn't do anything about it, it probably should have, but I know that Windwatch felt that they would like to go second, and because typically they feel that, you know, if they go first, all their points are rebutted and they don't have an opportunity to respond. And
Well, I don't think they said anything like that now to the staff.
No, they
So
didn't.
yes,
They didn't.
yes. Ideally, I think we would have liked them to be on maybe 2 different dates,
Yeah.
but that's the only date that suit both groups. So yeah.
just in case the issue is that, you know, you might flip a coin or something. I'm not sure what way you would do it.
It's,
Not a GA match now.
well,
You have to check the
Okay.
coin too. You have to check the coin.
yeah. Okay, members, we'll discuss that when we get to the item.
I
Okay,
think that's very
Barry?
important.
Yeah.
Could be a serious issue later on.
Always go
Yeah.
back and look for him. You could always go back and look for him.
You go to a lot of matches.
Yeah. Okay, matters arising, members. Now, come on.
Check the coin all the time.
We have 3 presentations, so we want some members have to go as well early. So I want to allow as much time as possible for members to hear the presentations. Page 19, we have a cover note there on matters arising. Members, if you have any comments on items 4.2, the 4.6, or if you're content to note these items. Okay, 4.7 on page 38 is about local government employee and councillor working relationship protocol. I picked that out maybe just to bring to your attention, members. The department issued the draft protocol to core councils and key stakeholders for their consideration. And has adopted changes recommended by a working group set up to consider the protocol. It is planned that following agreement by the Minister, the department would issue the agreed protocol to the sector for implementation. I'm surprised there isn't an existing protocol, but I'm glad now they're producing one anyway. Okay, members, any views on the draft protocol? Is that page 38? I think it's important to have something in writing anyway. Protect both sides.
Chair, I suppose the only thing we'll say about it is, and obviously the protocol is welcome. I mean, we need feedback from local authority at some point to see how that's operating, you know.
Yeah, after a while. Yeah,
Just
yeah.
keep an eye on it, yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we do. Yep. Thank you. Then we move on to consultations, members. Again, there's a cover note at page 46, members, for you all to look at. Are you content to request a synopsis of responses to all these consultations?
Yes.
Oh, agree? Okay. And then the next is on to synopsis of responses to the consultations. First one is on fixed penalties for enforcement of bylaws protecting MCZs and marine sites, and that's at page 82. The synopsis to the consultation on legislation to introduce fixed penalties for enforcement of bylaws protecting MCZs and marine sites. That's page 82. The department has indicated that stakeholders were broadly supportive of the introduction of a financial penalty. Members, are you content then to consider final proposals for the draft legislation when these are brought forward? So it seems to be people quite happy. I think it makes it so much simpler too. Penalty, that's it, and people know the consequences. Save going to court and all that as well. Okay, members, next item for synopsis of responses is one on a scheme of continuous insurance enforcement, the CIE, and that's on page 96. For referring members to this. The scheme would mean that every vehicle, unless a SORN notice had been received, would be required to have insurance, whether or not it is being used on the road.
Sure,
Peter, yeah.
Just wondering, I mean, fair enough in terms of what's there. In terms of the information, I mean, I appreciate it falls, the issue falls directly within the DOE powers. If we're talking about insurance issues, I don't know, I mean, do we maybe need also simply to copy in a couple of other, there might be a couple of other relevant committees in connection with that with the synopsis, or you say if we're looking at insurance issues, are there, maybe just the issue enough that we don't have to, but I'm just sort of maybe inquiring more than suggesting.
Who would be looking at insurance? Daddy?
Daddy might have an interest in the broader insurance issues, but like it may be that this is sufficiently net that it doesn't impact in on them. But I'm just wondering from the point of view of whether there's tend to be look at issues around insurance, whatever.
We could write to the committee.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe to be honest, to be fair to them, it may not be particularly relevant to them. But I mean, I'm just conscious of the fact that it has a slightly cross-cutting nature in it.
Okay, yeah. Members agree with that?
Yeah,
We'll
that's...
send that to committee for Etty. Sandra?
Have we had briefings on this particular proposals before my time in
not
committee or
really.
anything? Is this something we'll be looking at?
I don't think so. No.
No.
We were just
I
told
would have
about the
a few-
consultation.
Yeah, you would have a few questions about the background of this.
You move on.
You know, is that something we will be looking at?
Well, we can ask for a briefing, for an oral briefing. Members, okay?
I think, Chair, that would be
Yeah.
helpful because it's
Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
potentially would impact on
Yeah.
quite a few people and support.
I think really in rural areas it would affect.
Yeah.
People would have cars that are maybe they don't be using,
Yeah,
um, but
on a very unregulated,
well, it's
irregular
just they
basis.
maybe haven't passed its MOT and it's sitting there in the yard and it'll get time to fix it at some stage and maybe they haven't insured it until they get it back on the road again. You know, there's certain circumstances that.
Yeah.
Plus, there's questions about, about the PSNI, will they still be doing road checks on insurance? Because just because the car has insurance might not, the driver that's driving the vehicle mightn't be insured for the vehicle. So, I'm just wondering, are those sort of checks still going to be
It is
planned?
now all going to be computerised. The police could check that, is that right? On
So
the-
they
Come-
still will be
come to-
checking them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they are not able to access the computer until, I think, next year.
Yes, I think that's right. There's a delay.
Yeah, there's a delay. They can't just, stand on the road and check with whatever device they have
Okay.
until next year.
So it would be
Yeah.
useful to have some sort of briefing to get
Yeah.
those
yeah.
details out.
We can
Thank you.
do that. Yep, yeah.
Sure,
Good
has
idea.
this been dealt with through Swansea, is it?
Yeah, this is all centralised.
I mean, after
This-
the issue with the tax books as it is at the minute, there seems to be problems, you know what I mean? Need to make sure that this is not another problem that's going to, find its way onto the table.
I think it's always been a problem about car insurance in Northern Ireland anyway, people driving
Well-
without insurance. Yeah.
I would suggest we keep an eye on.
Yeah, okay. And then we no longer now need to put the disc onto it because it is all centralised, supposed to be able to the police can just check that immediately. So, you know, if you don't have the disc, then it's, I think, much less
I should be able to.
easy to police for anyone to detect it. Yeah. Okay. Next one is on page 119, members. This is synopsis of responses to the consultation on the significant water management issues in the northwestern, northeastern, and the Ney-Ban River Basin districts. Members, I know we have always been quite interested in this issue. So the department has offered to give us an oral briefing before plans are drafted for the second cycle of the River Basin Management Plan for 2016 to 2021. So, members, are you content if we arrange for the department to come and give us an oral briefing on this?
Great.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a summit at some stage, but it's now going to be early next year, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, not anymore. There was one supposed to be for November, wasn't it? October, November. Now it's been postponed to next year, so it will be timely if we get an oral briefing ASAP from them. Members, next item is at page 189, another synopsis of responses, and this is to the consultation on amending the Environmental Liability Prevention and Remediation Regulations NI 2009. This is in relation to the proposed transposition of the Offshore Services Directive to address the prevention and correction of damage in the marine environment. The 5 responses to this consultation are broadly supportive. Okay, members, are you content for the department to proceed to draft the SL1?
Yes.
Okay, happy with that one. Okay, next one is an SL1, members, at page 196. That's the Producer Responsibility Obligation Packaging Waste Amendment Regulations NI 2014. The main purpose of this rule is to transpose an EU directive on the use of recycled glass in glass products such as glass bottles and jars. The directive set a recycling target of 60% for glass based on the percentage of the amount placed on the UK market on an annual basis. The rule will be subject to the negative resolution and is intended to come into operation in November 2014. Members, are you content for the department to proceed with making the rule? We don't have much time. Hurry up. Yep. Okay, so now we have a number then of taxi regulations, legislations, members, or SL1. We have a cover letter there, haven't we? No, we don't have. Okay. The Minister has looked at the committee's concerns about the taxi legislation, but his position remains unchanged from his previous written statement.
Right,
Okay,
some say
members.
Chair Ditto might be the
Very
answer.
disappointing. One ahead, Chair.
Chair, I think
Yeah.
just looking at the ones, one point of clarification just
They're
first
at
of all.
page 200, members, from
Yeah,
page
I
200.
appreciate there's a number of these now. To be fair, I think there's one that's maybe slightly separate, which is the taxi drivers' licences regulations, which is really about renewal and training, I think.
Yeah.
That's maybe in a
Yeah.
different category, to be fair to that. To clarify, first of all, just we've got within the table papers,
Yes.
talks about the statutory rule on the taxi operators' licence amendment regulations, and also then there's an SL1, and is that those two are separate, are they? Or
No,
What's the?
Peter, when we got the SL1, I thought it would be a wee bit difficult for members really to understand the content of the SL1. It wasn't very detailed. So I asked the department if they could give us a wee bit more detail. So they have substituted and amended SL1, and that is what has been tabled.
Okay.
So it's only an SL1 at that point.
That's okay. Thank you, Chair. No, I mean, because I agree actually with the clerk that I have to say, I know we've been involved in this issue for quite a while, but to be fair, even whenever we got the stuff, it did seem just the way it was presented by the department was quite confusing, to be perfectly honest on it initially. On that. But, Chair, certainly as regards the first two SL1s and the statutory rule on the Taxis Act, all of which, I mean, the specifically, I suppose, as regards the signage bit, that was something whenever it went out to consultation in 2014, got a very large volume of concerns that were raised with that. And it's interlinked, I think, with the other issues in terms of the issues around the application of the single tier in Belfast, which obviously the other SL1 and the SR. I have to say I'm actually fairly disappointed we've got to this stage, because a number of us on the committee have been flagging up, if not flagging down, an issue in relation to issues in relation to this, around enforcement. And I know there's been a number of questions have also been put about concerns over even as well the sequencing of this with regard also to metering, because there are concerns over what is happening in terms of the installation of meters. There's concerns over the fact that that won't be fit for purpose in a position before the proposed date of the single tier. As such,
well, the meter has been postponed as well, remember?
Yes, the point actually is that to some extent the problem actually is that if the metering comes in considerably after the single tier, that actually...
That's to allow people a bit of time,
well,
to
Chair,
to put
there is
that
a concern that you have a situation in which you have, in one sense, a free-for-all, but in which some people are regulated and some people are not. It actually, the fact that, for example, in taxi operator centres are potentially some distance still down the way, the fact that the meters, and there have been concerns raised by people involved in certainly with me, in terms of the meter installing industry, that what is being installed at present, there are different things happening for the way the department is dealing with it, which is allowing different rates, and for example allowing some of the private companies to put for instance, a greater tariff and charge on disabled, for disabled passengers. There's concerns raised around that. That's maybe a slightly side issue to this. But Chair, I suppose my concern in relation to each of these items has been there have been some concerns raised and a compromise tried to be reached probably for about a year, and you'll be well aware, because you've helped facilitate it, that I think even before last Christmas we met with officials from the department and said, look, here's more or less the compromise which is needed to get everybody, won't give everybody what they want, but give something to think. And we've constantly said that, and the disappointing thing is it's pretty much... You
mean the exclusion zone? You mean?
Yeah, exclusion. Well, there was issues raised around the exclusion zone, and I appreciate it's not a statutory matter. The two issues largely raised was some sort of limited exclusion zone, and again there could be talk around that. And secondly, the issue of there was...
Don't think he's going to budge. Don't think the minister's
with respect on it, he requires our consent for this to go through, and on that basis on it. What I'm saying is, if there's not a compromise, which there clearly doesn't appear to be at this stage, I don't feel any other course of action other than to pray against this, and I think the committee should pray against this, these regulations in the SL1s. But quite frankly, unfortunately, we've been trying to say, look, bring something which people could buy into and can be accepted. And that has not simply happened. I think that does leave us now. What it means is if they're prayed against and then rejected by the Assembly, there are alternative SL1s that could be brought forward by the department in relation to it. I think there's still actually time, apart from else, to do that reasonably quickly. But, we can't simply have a situation where, because I think what is being proposed is not going to be fit for purpose. In the long run, it's not going to help the consumer, because there is a grave concern that in the centre of Belfast it's simply going to lead to a couple of big companies simply dominating the market to the exclusion of others. Now, I know that the debate's gone back and forth. So from that point of view, I think the SR on the taxi drivers licensing regulations, because it deals with training, is different. I don't have a particular problem with that, but the other two SL1s...
The first one on page 200, that's about signage, just a yellow light. of the taxi roof
I
sign.
understand that, but if you remember whenever consultation came back, I think in connection with that, there was a very clear majority of folk actually were deeply hostile to that, and I think it is interlinked in many ways. Now, there's no problem if there's going to be some level of change in relation to this. I would prefer effectively the rest of these were taken away by way of ultimately a provisional. I'd prefer they hadn't come to us, to be honest, in the first place. I prefer there'd actually been something sensible had been put forward that people can live with. But I think they are. I think the signage is interlinked with the many ways with the single tier on that basis. Obviously,
It's quite a simple matter to me, though. I mean, the first one is to exempt the yellow light of a taxi roof sign from the requirement for a rear-facing lamp to be in red. So, I mean, apparently all the lights from the back, the rule is that all has to be in red, but the taxi sign on the top, on the roof of the taxi, is exempt then from having of it being red. It's just this, the usual sign is yellow. So, I mean, that's not a big deal to me.
To be honest, Chair, see at this stage, to me it's irrelevant what colour the signage is. The reality is that, I've said here in previous committees, there's no point in bringing forward any other parts of this legislation to resolve the issue of single tier. So I'll not be supporting any of it coming through until that's addressed. So we can talk all around, we all understand, we've been at it for a long period of time, and there's clear frustration out there. It's clearly not working. Enforcement's another issue we need to seriously look at because it's not working. So, rather than talk, we can talk all day, and Chair, it's up to yourself. I'll take guidance from yourself. But as far as I'm concerned, I'll not be supporting, or my party will not be supporting any of the stuff that's coming through today until we see some resolve in relation to the single tier issue. So, if it needs to be that I need to support praying against it, so be it.
Okay.
So.
And what about the next SL1 then? Yeah. We'll do one at a time. We need to record this then. Okay, members, just put it on the record. So this is the first one. This is item 11 at page 200. Okay, this is in relation to the Road Vehicles Lighting Amendment Regulations NI 2014. The purpose of the rule is to exempt the yellow light of a taxi roof sign from the requirement for a rear-facing lamp to be red. Okay, it is subject to negative resolution and is intended to come into operation on the 31st of January 2014. So, members, are you content for the department to proceed with making the rule? Those who are content, you want to raise your hands? Those who object, raise your hands. Okay, you got all of them. Okay, next item.
Just to clarify then, on the basis if we're not content, does that mean the committee's then praying against?
No, this is just the SL1 stage.
Okay.
It's an SR. When is that SR?
Because when the SR, that's okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's fair enough then.
Yeah.
So, sorry, to clarify then, on that basis then, it will mean in terms of whatever votes we take in relation to this, the only one that will come directly onto the floor of the Assembly, if there's a prayer annulment, will be the SR. If it's
so that's correct.
That's okay. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So then the next one is item 12, SL1, Taxi Operators Licensing Amendment Regulations. That's page 205 and tabled. The main purpose of the rule is to make minor amendments to cater for the new classes of taxis being introduced and to reflect the fact that taxi vehicle licensing will be governed in future by the Taxis Act 2008 rather than the Road Traffic Order 1981. The proposed regulations amend Regulation 9 particulars of taxis bookings of the Taxi Operators Licensing Regulation NI 2012, the regulations, to provide for the record-keeping requirements of the new Class C taxis. This class of taxi will be permitted to carry passengers for hire or reward, but only alongside from exemptions from wedding and courtesy transport when pre-booked via the prescribed journey form. These taxis may be used, for example, as chauffeur services, weddings, funerals, and courtesy transport. This taxi is not required to display roof signage and will not be subject to forthcoming requirements around taxi meters. It is subject to the negative resolution and is intended to come into operation on the 31st of January 2015. Members, any comment, or are you content for the department to proceed with making the route? Members not content, we are divided here. Those who are content for the department to proceed, raise your hands. Those who are not content for the department to proceed. Okay. So the next move is then.
We don't have to do anything. We'll
No,
just
we
tell
don't.
the
We don't have
department.
to wait to the next stage.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I mean, members, do you want to bring the department back and have, another discussion with them?
Chair, you're saying the department's content to move forward this year, well, the minister is, so I mean, I don't mind if the department want to come back with something.
Sure, I mean, I think it would be helpful. I mean, I think that there's got to be a message to the department of simply the idea they can just proceed ahead and completely disregard everything that's been said. I think we want to see a common sense solution to this, but it's not on the basis of what's there present in that.
Yeah.
So I'd certainly be happy to.
Okay, Ian, you want to speak? Sorry,
Yeah,
Ian.
I think-
And then you, Lotmara.
I think it's just following on from that. I think if the department and the minister aren't listening loud and clear to what they're hearing from the committee, then they know what's going to come in the sense of when they bring these to the House. Yeah. So I think it's in their interest to either come back to the committee with the necessary amendments, or it doesn't go anywhere. So that's
Okay. Lotmara, you
Well,
want to
similar to when the department was here, we made it quite clear to them on that particular occasion that they had not heard the last of this, if this was the route that they were bent on going down, and they decided, look, this is not relevant to them. They went ahead, and here we are. The day has now arrived. So I think it's really up to the department now whether they feel that they think that they should be coming. I personally think they should, but they may not feel that way, so therefore minding what their attitude was the last time they're here, I suspect they might say, no, we're not coming. But yes, I think they should be, because there has to be a resolution.
Okay. Okay. Members, then we moved on then to other items. Then number 13 and 14 are also on taxis regulations. So the next item is item 13 at page 228. Members, that's a statutory rule. This is really a commencement order, and the committee does not hold any scrutiny rule in this piece of legislation.
Well, Chair, could I propose that are we in a position then to pray against this particular rule? We're not?
No.
That was passed in, 2008?
Yeah, it's part of the Taxis Act 2008. It's just bringing into effect some of the provisions of that. You have no role in it.
No. Yeah, it's already passed. It's just letting us know when the starting date is. Yeah. Okay. The next item is on page 238, and that's the taxi drivers' licenses regulation. The purpose of the rule is to introduce a taxi driver test for new drivers and to require all taxi drivers to undertake regular periodic training prior to renewing their license. The rule also specifies certain medical conditions which may impact adversely on holding a taxi license. The committee considered two relevant SL1s at a meeting on the 12th of December 2013 and 20th February this year. when members were content for the department to proceed with making the ROO. The ROO is subject to negative resolution and is due to come into operation on 31st of October 2014. So if I can put to members the following question. The Committee for the Environment has considered SR 2014/239, the Taxi Drivers Licences Regulations NI 2014, and subject to the report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules, has no objection to the ROO. Are members agreed?
I'm agreed.
Agreed? Okay.
I don't think it relates to the second.
No, I think it's important that, safety of passengers should be of paramount interest to all of us. Okay, next item is another statutory ROO, members, at page 271. And the purpose of the ROO is to add a number of additional fields to the schedule that have been tested and found to be suitable for use in smoke control areas. We looked at this, members, on the 11th of September 2014, when we were content for the department to proceed with making the ROO. The ROO is subject to negative resolution and is due to come into operation on the 3rd of November 2014. The question is, members, the Committee for the Environment has considered SR 2014/249, the Smoke Control Areas Authorised Fuels Amendment Regulations NI 2014, and subject to the report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules, has no objection to the ROO. Are members agreed? Agreed. Okay. Next item is another SR. This one is the Waste Management Licensing Amendment at page 279. Purpose of the ROO is to implement an EU directive on the recycling and disposal of waste batteries and accumulators. We consider the SL1 on the 29th of September, when we were content for the department to proceed with making the ROO. The ROO is subject to negative resolution and is due to come into operation on the 24th of October. The question is, the Committee for the Environment has considered SR 2014/253, the Waste Management Licensing Amendment No. 2 Regulations, NI 2014, and subject to the report of the Examiner of Statutory Rules, has no objection to the ROO. Are members agreed? Agreed? Okay, thank you. Next item is a briefing, members, looking again at our scrutiny of the Road Traffic Amendment Bill. Members, at page 284 to 289, you have the Driver Instructors National Association Council, the Driving Instructors Association Northern Ireland, and the Driving Instructors Mid-Ulster Association submission. Okay, quite a lot of that. So, hello, good morning. You're very welcome, Tom. Tom Burns is a chairperson of the Driving Instructors National Association Council. Are you based in Northern Ireland?
That's correct, Minister.
Okay. Chair.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Just to remind everyone, this session is being recorded by Hansat, and that will go into the committee report on the scrutiny of this piece of legislation. Mr. Burns, we all have your submission, your written paper, but if you can just give us 5-10 minutes, go over it, and then afterwards members will ask you questions. Okay, thank you.
No problem, Chair. One of the main concerns is a proposal to reduce the learner age to 16.5. In general, driving instructors have not been convinced of any safety merits to this. It's totally out of sync with the rest of the United Kingdom. So that brings about various legal aspects of perhaps someone from Northern Ireland who learns to drive in Scotland because they're at university or at sort of school at university, and they're 17 and a little bit, and they then have a full licence but they're driving in Northern Ireland? Or can a person go to England and do a test at 17? Because legislation allows vice versa tests being done between ourselves, motorbikes and car licences between ourselves and England, etc. So there's various things there that causes great concern. Number one is the fact that there's no scientific or safety information to say that reducing the age to 16.5 is going to have any benefit. People have talked about people in some other countries learning to drive at 16. The vast majority of those other countries, they learn in an automatic car. And believe me, as an instructor in an automatic car and a manual car, I can tell you that teaching a person in an automatic car is a gift, as opposed to trying to teach somebody in a manual car where they're constantly dropping the clutch and stalling. So I don't think that sort of comparison relays. Plus, in a lot of the countries where they're allowed to drive at 16, the roads are significantly larger, wider, and the parking spaces are significantly larger, wider than we have in this small country, which only has a reduced motorway space, and most of our roads are quite small. So, from the standpoint of 16.5, we're not convinced by any merits to it whatsoever. Nobody has convinced us about it. We don't see any reason for bringing about legislation needlessly, because there's a recession on there and legislation costs money. So we don't really see any merit in bringing down to 16.5, which is going to put us out of sync. The other thing is that we feel that consultation papers are being misread and misinterpreted. Because the reason it was given to us for the 16.5 was the fact that this was supposed to be a compromise. Now, at no stage in the consultation paper did driving instructors say that they wanted the age reduced to 16. The consultation paper did ask a question about reducing the age to 16, and driving instructors comment that if this came about, because there had been talk of the United Kingdom, GB, England, etc., changing the age, plus there is a thought in Europe about changing the ages. So what we had said was that if there was a reduction to 16, as an example, we wouldn't want to see anybody taking a test before they're 17. But if you read on in the consultation paper, we're quite adamant that the fact we're quite happy for the age to stay as is at 17 years of age. So it was told to us that this was a compromise for us, and we said, but we never asked for a compromise. We never asked for 16 years of age. So it's not a compromise. So to date, we still have no reason whatsoever to the reason of 16.5 being brought about. We think it's a total waste of time, and the legislation that's there with 17 suffices. So that is one of our main bugbears. The other thing about the consultation and the proposed DDL, etc., is that the legislation originally, now there has been sort of amendments put in now, but originally we had to point out to Minister Atwood that the legislation as proposed meant that everybody who was a learner, no matter what age, would have to wait 12 months before they could do a test. Now, we pointed out to Minister Atwood at the time that this didn't make sense, because a lot of driving instructors would give what you would know as intensive or crash courses, and I don't mean Christ into people. So they would, people would do intensive courses. So to give you an example, you could have a pregnant lady who comes along, she's pregnant, she's going to have to get childcare, she's going to have to maybe go out of her way from work to go and leave the child off, etc., etc. You get the idea of what I'm speaking about. Now, we're supposed to speak to that pregnant lady and say, I'm sorry, madam, but you can't do a test until you've had your licence for 12 months, which doesn't make sense. It also, in a time of recession, when people are trying to better themselves, trying to get promotions, trying to get jobs, means that people are going to be told, I'm sorry, the job with the company car, you're not going to be able to take the car and the job because I'm afraid you can't do your test for 12 months. It doesn't make sense. Someone who wants to move house, perhaps out to the country, where there's no buses or whatever the case may be, is being told, I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait 12 months. Or in a scenario that happened to me a few years ago, a gentleman came to me in January, at the end of January, and said, I'm emigrating to Australia at the end of March. I have never turned a steering wheel in my life. Is there any way that you can get me through my driving test? And I said, yes, but you'll be out every day learning how to drive. So subsequently, he booked the test for the end of February, so that meant if he had failed, he at least had an opportunity to take a test before he emigrated. And because he was out every day, he passed his test, and I might say very successfully. But in the situation we're talking about now, I would have had to say, I'm sorry, it can't be done, you're going to have to wait 12 months. So the 16.5 doesn't make sense, no rhyme or reason to it. The provision that people should have to wait 12 months no sense to it whatsoever. Plus, the aspect of 12 months doesn't say that the person has to take driving lessons for 12 months. It just says they have to have a licence for 12 months. Now, as some of your esteemed colleagues around the table will know, there was a rather farcical situation happening in the Republic of Ireland several years ago, where people were told, because there was a backlog of driving tests, that anybody who had had a driving licence in their drawer for so long could consider themselves passed. Now, is that what we want to see in Northern Ireland? Of course not. We want to see sensible legislation whereby people are being properly trained to be safe on the roads, not that people sit on a driving licence and 1 month before their year expires, they come to a driving instructor and say to the driving instructor, you have to get me through my test because I've had my licence for 12 months now. It just doesn't make sense. It's all about quality. It's all about quality of teaching. It's not about quantity. So in one case, you could find someone who takes 20 hours of driving lessons and they are absolutely superb and they listen to everything you say and they could be the next Formula 1 champion. Simple as that. On the other hand, you find somebody that 200 hours later, it's going to be a long struggle. So
costly as well.
And costly as well, yes. But as I often say to people who talk about cost, when you compare the price of a driving lesson where an individual is being picked up at home, is using a car, this car is properly insured, properly maintained, in comparison to taking a violin lesson or a horse riding lesson or a piano lesson, I think you'll find driving lessons are exceptionally good value for money. So,
teacher would agree.
I don't know about that. And we pay taxes on the money we receive, which is also good for the economy. So the other aspect was to do with the number one. There was a proposal about a restriction, a curfew, and things like this, and so on. And I think a lot of the politicians could see that this wouldn't happen in Northern Ireland because a lot of particularly young people are involved, as you very well know, in the hospitality trade. And some of the kids...
The curfew's out.
Yeah, I know it is, but you know, that was something that we better complain about. But we've still got this aspect about the age of the people who are going to be allowed to be in the car, the relationship to it. Now, I heard the word enforcement being used quite effectively around the table here with the taxi debate, and it's another enforcement issue. If I see on a daily basis people smoking whilst they're driving company cars, company vans, including council vehicles, etc., and nothing happening about it, or using their mobile phones and nothing happening about it, I don't really see how the police have got the ability to enforce such a proposal. Plus, on a Saturday night, there's 3 other young people in the car, and they all say, "I'm his brother." Well, have you got any ID? No, I don't have any ID on me. Yes, on paper, sure, it's a brilliant idea because we know statistically that the more young people that are in a car at the one time, if there is an accident, obviously because of numbers, there's a good chance of fatalities or serious injuries. Plus, there is the chance of people playing about and loud music being played, etc. And we understand that. We're doing this job an awful long time, and we understand. But it's the practicalities of it, it's the enforcement of it, and as I said at the onset, there's no point producing legislation which costs money if the legislation is unenforceable. No matter how good the legislation is, people have now on the packets of cigarettes that they're going to kill you. Now, the only other way is to ban them completely. So, you know, you have to educate people. And what we have said before is, forget about reactive legislation. If we're going to produce legislation, let's have proactive legislation, which is going to prevent the horse bolting from the stable, not waiting until the child is lying seriously injured or dead on the road and say, well, they shouldn't have been in the car with that individual because they weren't allowed to be there. So that is our idea as regards legislation, if necessary. A good piece of legislation would make it compulsory that learners learn on a motorway. Now, one of the definite points of legislation is the removal of the 45 miles per hour speed limit. A lot of people don't realise, but England, Scotland, Wales, you're not restricted to 45 when you're a learner. So the instructor teaches you at 60 miles an hour. He teaches you at 70 miles an hour on a dual carriageway. And our 45-mile-an-hour speed limit hasn't produced any miraculous reduction in casualties. So far better that the person is taught at the higher speeds. From experience and from experience of members, some of us have tried encouraging people to take motorway lessons and either charge them nothing, just to prove we're nice guys, or charge them a reduced rate. And I would say you are lucky if 1 in 10 people takes you up on it. So out of every 100 people who pass a driving test in Northern Ireland, you are lucky if one person out of that 100, 10 people out of that 100 would actually take you up on it, and you'll actually find it's a lot less than that. So they have no experience whatsoever driving on a motorway. And we know that a lot of people, you've seen them yourself, they've got an R plate on the back of the car, and you're doing 60 miles an hour and they overtake you at 80 miles an hour. Now, far better the person learns how to drive at the higher speeds. As we've often said, there's no point...
You're stuck behind them and you try to overtake them.
Oh, yeah, well, this is it. That's another, which causes trouble and causes problems. So it actually, if you ever try driving at 40 miles an hour on the motorway when it's flowing fast. Try moving lanes. Try joining the motorway. And it's the most dangerous thing you can possibly do. The 45-mile-an-hour speed limit was set up as a test to see what would happen. And I don't know, it just got stuck in legislation and stayed here forever. So we would like parity with GB. Plus, when somebody passes their driving test here and they're restricted to 45, they can jump on a boat, go to England. They don't have to legally display an R plate, and they don't have to do 45 miles an hour. So they're travelling on the M26 at 70 miles an hour, literally a day after they've done their driving test, because they're going to university and daddy's bought them a car. So they would be the main bones of contention. The 16.5, the 1 year, 12 months probationary period, which is, if a person is talented, what the department have said is that they were talking about putting in certain, what's the term I'm looking for? I'm trying to think of the term. But in other words, someone could say, but I am expecting a baby, so I want to be able to do my test. More legislation, more paperwork. It doesn't make sense. Proper instruction, properly tested. The test itself needs looked at. The driving test. The driving test is too easy. Now, I know some people here maybe failed their driving test, but believe me, it is too easy. The driving test, as is, hasn't really changed. There's been a few little amendments to it over the years, which, to be honest with you, have got nothing to do with driving ability. There's other more important things out there. This is a rhetorical question, so I'm not expecting anybody to put their hand up. But does anybody here understand or know what a forward stop line is? Just think about that. Don't answer. Right?
No, I
So, okay. So, now, most of the individuals around this table have got a driving licence, but that's new road system that has come in that people don't understand and don't know about because it hasn't been broadcast. But you know what's supposed to happen according to the department? You're supposed to read your highway code book, which of course you all have, and you all take to bed every night with your cup of cocoa. So you know, there has to be information for the public. New drivers are probably better up with road legislation than people that have had their licence 10, 20, 30 years. Most of us think we know how to go round a roundabout. I brought a police officer, because I also instruct motorcycles as well, and I brought a police officer who was taking CBT, compulsory basic training, which is now a requirement in law, which the basis of it is good, but that's beside the point. There's other issues there. I brought a police officer who had to do CBT because he wants to do his motorbike licence test and then become a motorcycle police officer. And I brought him to the roundabout at the top of Craigie Road, which is called the Bellsbridge Roundabout. Part of training on the roundabout would be, you can't train somebody whilst they're going round a roundabout because you've only got a radio talking to them. So you stop the bike, you get off, you talk about the various sections, the positions you should be in, what you should be looking at, etc. So we were standing, and because both of us were wearing yellow vests and white helmets, we're both looking very official. The number of people who were slamming on their brakes was quite unbelievable because they thought they were police officers. But the whole point of the exercise was for him to identify the number of people approaching the roundabout in the wrong lane with the wrong signal, no lane discipline, as it's called, that is drifting in front of other vehicles, etc. And I said to them, now, before we start this exercise, I'm telling you now, you're going to be lucky if 1 person in 10 does it right. And I was proved correct. Now, lots and lots of people are out there who think they're good drivers, but how do you know you're a good driver? When you look at the mirror, you think you're good looking, but somebody else has to tell you if you're good looking or not. Right? So the problem is education. Education. That's why I was looking this morning at the statistics. You'll find it's not young people who are all getting killed at the minute. Now, recently we've had 2 fatalities, a 17-year-old girl who was in a car and an 18-year-old student that was knocked down by a 29-year-old, I believe it might have been. So it wasn't the 17 to 24 age group that we're talking about. It was the 18-year-old, unfortunately, that was killed. I don't know the background to it, but you'll find that in the motorcycles, they're called born-again bikers, and that's got nothing to do with religion. That's just the fact that these people had a motorcycle licence when they were 17, 18, haven't ridden a motorbike in maybe 15, 20 years, have got a bit of money now, have went out and bought themselves a bike, and they don't realise the capabilities of a modern bike. A modern bike today is what the guys that were doing GP racing were using maybe not even 10 years ago. So that's out on the road. You've got bikes that are capable of 0 to 100 miles an hour in first gear. Think about that, first gear. You try getting your car to go to 30 in first gear.
You're scaring me. My oldest son just passed his
motorbike. Has he just passed his motorbike licence? So, as test. But you know, these people are out there who don't know the highway code. They don't know how to do certain things. They think they know it. And in many cases, it's these people, the experienced drivers, who are causing the accidents and causing the problems. So we need a public education for not only people who have just got their learner licence, who in some cases are young people, but as I've already discussed with the committee, some of these people are middle-aged, who suddenly decide. I've actually had people who are elderly in their 60s, who their partner has died. There's a car sitting at the door, and they've said, the car's lying there, I'm dependent upon the car to get my shopping, I need to learn how to drive. So learner does not mean 17, or in the case of this legislation, 16 and a half. Learner means someone who has a provisional licence. And everybody is different. You know, I'm sure there's things that you are very capable of, Chair, that maybe some member of your family just can't do. As opposed to there's things that a member of your family can do that you just go, here, you do it, you're better than I am. So it's exactly the same thing in driving. There's all sorts of standards of drivers, but if there's a public education of all drivers, we've actually called for an MOT. Why have an MOT in Northern Ireland of a vehicle that's 4 years old, 4 years or older, when I think it's 99% of all RTCs are caused by driver error of some sort, whether it be drink, drive, speed or whatever, nothing to do with the vehicle. So, you know, we have vehicles getting tested every year. Now, we're not proposing that. What we're saying is every driver should have to come back for some sort of classroom and a bit of driving, the same way as people who have committed an offence are now being encouraged to do, rather than take the penalty points, go to the classroom. In some cases, some have to do drives, etc., etc. You know, that is a sensible way to go. So if we want to have legislation, let's have sensible legislation. Let's have legislation that is going to do something, as opposed to, unfortunately, legislation that we feel is wasted time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Burns. I think you put in a lot of very sensible arguments. We certainly we are scrutinising the bill very soon. Now, going to be talking to the department. Someone had put forward the concept, I think last time, the last briefing, that maybe when someone goes, a learner driver goes to an instructor, there should be like a preliminary assessment, and then to say, well, what are the areas this person need to do, and someone's already quite good at driving, you know, say driving a tractor previously. And
I would say, truthfully, Chair, any good driving instructor does that on their first lesson.
Okay.
Because you ask questions and you get the person to demonstrate.
Okay.
Just because someone says they can ride a motorcycle, I had one gentleman who told me he could ride a 1500cc motorcycle. I couldn't figure out what the 1500cc motorcycle was, because I don't know of any 1500cc motorcycles. But I said, OK, right? But I don't take for granted what somebody tells me. So he was put on a 125 motorcycle. The front tyre was put against a wall, because this is how you demonstrate if you've got clutch control. Because if you let go of the clutch, you don't go anywhere. And he let go of the clutch.
And
Up the wall.
you get the message.
I'm sorry, sir. You must have, thought about this before you had your cornflakes. So, any good instructor is taking their life in their hands with a lunatic. And believe me, there are lunatics out there. You should not have a provisional driving licence. I think the department is actually coming round to the fact there should be some sort of psychological profiling of people before they actually get a licence. And I think they're coming to that. Seriously, because we do get people who are demented. They are totally illusional. They just believe. I had an instance where a grandmother was passed over to me. This is a true story. A grandmother was passed over to me by another instructor.
Now, just be careful with the ageism here.
Yes. But you see, I'm old enough to be a granda. I know I don't look it, but that's beside the point.
Somebody has to tell you that you don't.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I am told that on frequent occasions. But a grandmother was passed over to me. The relevance to the grandmother you'll find out in a wee second. So, first thing she said to me is, when are you putting me in for my driving test? Which is a common question. And I said, well, I need to see what you have been taught and what you've been able to do. And she said to me, oh, I'm a good driver. She says, I drive my own car. I said, what do you mean you drive your own car? She says, well, I take the kids to school and I do this, that and the other. And I said, well, who sits beside you? Nobody sits beside me. She says, I can do it myself. I went, yeah, and this is not uncommon either, I might add. Okay, that people have, when they get in cars and they drive and do all sorts of things, it's not the first one I've come across. Okay, so we proceed up the road and she's nearly taken every mirror off every car on the way up, etc. And I'm having to keep adjusting the steering because she's going to take a mirror off, my mirror off and their mirror. So we get it round and we stop the car and I said, look, we've got a bit of problem with what's called spatial awareness.
Yeah.
You see, if you just stare straight ahead of you, you're totally unaware of what's happening on the side. So you have to see what's happening. And she said, well, my grandson thinks I'm a brilliant driver and he thinks I should be in for my driving test. This is true. This is true. And I said to her, right, okay. I said, well, what sort of driving experience has your grandson got? She says, my grandson's 8. Now, that is a true story, and that is not... One of these days I'll write a book, Minister, and
Yes,
Chair,
that will be.
I'll send you the first copy.
I'm sure there'll be lots of good stories.
Seriously, that's the sort of things that are out there. As regards problems, people who are delusional about what they can or cannot do, people complaining about the amount of money they're spending, and they're told, "Do you think you're going to run a car for £50 a week?" And they go, "What do you mean?" Well, not only do you buy the car, you have to tax and insure the car, but you also have to put fuel in it. And this car takes £70 to fill it. And believe me, it gets brought to the petrol station or practically every day to be filled. So people are they just think of a driving licence as a right rather than something you have to work to and a privilege. Okay. I think that boils down.
Yeah. I think that point you raised about being out of parity with the rest of the UK is a point that would need to be maybe asking the department, that if we are out of step with the rest of the UK.
It does make sense.
What about Ireland? Are they the same too, Carol, in the Republic of Ireland?
You're the expert.
Sorry, Chair.
Are they the
He's looking up his numbers in the lottery.
No, I'm just...
They're not
forward line.
Yeah, they're not the same as us still. They are still 17
Yes.
to get the driving licence.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll let other members come in. Pam? Yeah.
Thank you, Tom, and good to see you again.
Hello there.
Some time ago. The first question I'd like to ask you is, what is a forward stop line?
Remember, this is being recorded. Some time ago, some of you will have noticed that a little green box appeared in front of traffic lights. Subsequently, in most cases, but I don't think in every case, so this is something to take up with the road service, but a white bicycle symbol then appeared as well. I was interviewed by one of the news channels, and it started off in Bangor. As far as I know, they started off in Bangor, and people in Bangor were totally bemused by these things. They thought it was alien landings or something. It was crop circles, and it appeared in Belfast with no public announcement as to what it is, how you handle it, etc. I was interviewed, and we were outside Queen's University, and you're mostly familiar with Stranmillis and University Road, etc. And the interviewer was asking me, and I said, look, rather than me answering things, let's watch the public and see how they handle the situation, because they don't know what it's about. So the whole purpose of it is that you've got a white line. That's the one that applies to you, the driver, the truck driver, the motorcyclist, whatever. The green box is for the safety of the cyclist, and they then have an advanced stop line. So we stood there like complete idiots while every member of the public did it wrong, because people stopped in it, and people crept up beside the one that was stopped in it, looked at the line and thought, well, they're in it, so I'm probably allowed in it, so they went into it. The worst scenario was the fact that cyclists didn't know what it was for, and cyclists rode straight through it, stopped on top of the crossing at the bottom of Stranmillis, just in the V. They stopped on the crossing, and the public had to walk around the cyclists on the green box to avoid them to get across to Queen's University, which was rather amusing. So this is an example of how everybody should be encouraged to read the highway code, because there is always something new coming. And when you're a learner driver, not only are you being encouraged to read it, but a decent instructor will bring you even out of your normal area to let you experience and let you see different scenarios. So one of the things that we would do as good instructors, but I can't say for everybody, but if someone works somewhere, you would try to allow them to drive from home to work or from work back to home, to give them an idea what traffic's like, etc. You would try to bring people to strange roundabouts that they may encounter or may not encounter. A classic example, Palm will be very knowledgeable about this, the V junction in the middle of Glengormley. Now, in the middle of Glengormley, there's a double set of traffic lights, and people don't understand what the double set of traffic lights for. Plus, they don't read where the road signs are placed, and the right lane is for taking the right fork. And the number of times that people, when they see a green light, shoot down the Antrim line is unbelievable. But there's a red light for going down the Antrim line or turning left up a Hightown Road. So they don't understand, and that's people who have maybe had licences for 30 years doing that.
I do find that junction really confusing. Yes.
Yep,
Yeah.
totally confusing.
Yes.
So left lane is for going up Hightown Road or going out the Antrim line. You're waiting on the left block of lights to appear. Anything on the right, be it red, amber or green, whatever the case may be, applies to the traffic on the right. But then people get totally confused when there is a single set of lights with a little box or boxes with arrows in them. And then people get totally confused by that. They don't know what to do. They don't know if they're allowed to go. People are totally confused by a green light, because you were taught at primary school a green light means go. And it doesn't mean go. It means that you can proceed if the junction is clear and safe.
Okay.
But having done that, you also have to be clear that there's no vulnerable people like a cyclist coming through.
Okay.
I think you've convinced us with education.
Education,
Definitely.
education, education.
Sandra?
Absolutely.
Just following on from that, how do you feel that education should be increased? You know, what format should that take, or do you know how should that be imposed, or what ideas have you behind
Right,
that?
well, interestingly enough, DINAC is actually working closely with it, which we had suggested to the road service, the road safety part of the DOE, that we should be more involved, because at the minute any education in schools, etc., is department staff or PSNI. No disrespect, none of them have ever taught anybody how to drive in their life. So, you know, it's all very well writing a cookbook, but have you actually cooked? So, we're actively involved at the moment on a programme whereby there's a booklet and leaflets and various other sort of prompt cards being produced that could be used as teaching aids that would sort of give real-life scenarios. Story of the girl who, I'll not mention too much details because at the end of the day, this is still in the early stages, but the girl who wasn't long past her driving test, and was coming up to her 18th birthday, and she was killed in her car. And the reason being given by PSNI was the fact that she was going far too fast. She couldn't control the vehicle, and her parents are in the book, and there's a picture of the girl, and she's a lovely looking wee girl, and you can relate to it and say, look at that wee girl, she's not here anymore, etc. So that we feel is going to be beneficial. But the problem, as I've already stated, is it's not just the learners you have to worry about. Statistics are telling you it's not the 17 to 24-year-olds that are going out and getting killed. It's the people who had their licence for a long time. So there's no point putting, because I feel sometimes young people get a raw deal. You know, they're bad about everything they do is wrong. And they're not. They're the future politicians that are going to be sitting around this table. So let's give them a bit of a break, and where young people have got intelligence and are able to understand and work things out, well then give them credit for that. Because it doesn't matter if they're 17 or 70. There's stupid people out there, there's ill-mannered people out there, there's people who you wouldn't want to be on your Christmas list out there driving cars. So there's that aspect of it, that booklet is being looked at. We have also had discussions as regards instructors going into schools, not for the purpose of toting business, but to go in there to talk to young ones from a standpoint of, I've given you a few wee scenarios there of things which have made you think, well, I'm in a position to do that because I've got the experience. I'm not making those scenarios up. And when I'm talking to someone about motorcycling, I can give them scenarios of me falling off a motorbike. And if I had not been wearing protective clothing, I wouldn't be here talking to you today, etc. So that's the sort of thing that we propose, that number one, we've got sort of literature that we're looking at for the instructors to use in-house, that instructors are used in a better way as regards education, younger people. And at the minute, you may be familiar with the radar project. Well, the radar project, we had suggested that some instructors might want to volunteer their services to help out at the radar. And so we've handed out the instructions, we've handed out the contact details, etc., to do that. By the way, we would be doing it for nothing. We're not going to get any remuneration for it. So, that's the positive things we want to do. But there's an awful lot more to do, and that is public education of not just young people, but the older people. And seriously thinking about an MOT for drivers, an MOT for drivers. Why not? If we're talking safety around here, that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that people who are mediocre drivers are made better. People who are good drivers are made better drivers. And we identify the people who shouldn't be on the road due to certain reasons, i.e. they're blind. It's as simple as that. I actually asked a pertinent question to a representative of PSNI at one of the road safety meetings. And you see, we've been banging on about the fact that before anybody gets a licence, or before they renew their licence after 10 years, Chair, they should have to provide a proper documentation from an optician saying, yes, their eyesight is good. One of the scary statistics that we came across several years ago, which we have harped on to several ministers about, Minister Poots comes to mind. I remember having a meeting with him on the radio down in Cumber. And so I don't know how long ago that is. About eyesight, approximately 1 in 4 of the population is night blind. Now, if you knew your taxi driver was night blind, would you get in the car with him? If there was a big sign on the back of his head that says, I am night blind, and you come out of your restaurant at 10 o'clock at night and you want to go home safely, would you get in the car with him? Of course you wouldn't. I'm being facetious here. But yet, there are people out there who are blind, as in they don't wear their glasses when they're driving, or contact lenses, whatever. They got their licence years ago, their eyesight has deteriorated with age, or because they're working in front of computers, or whatever the case may be. Their eyesight is so bad now that they're nearly on top of the sign before they actually realise it's there. And there's the people who are night blind, who shouldn't be driving legally because they can't see where they're going. It's as simple as that. Nothing is being done about that. It's interesting that quite a number of accidents happen on... You remember Cathal here has been chair, I think, of this, so you're quite familiar with the scenarios that have been going down the years. Most of these tragic accidents happen in unlit roads later on at night, and with a number of people in the vehicle. As I said facetiously to the police representative, And when you examined the dead people, what was their eyesight like? And the answer was, but sure, you couldn't do that. I said, yeah, exactly. So why not do it before they're dead? Because they may not be dead. If they could see the give way sign or the stop sign. You know, there's various scenarios that, as an experience, I'm also an advanced driver and an advanced driving instructor. I'm not just an ADI, which is an approved driving instructor. So, you know, I have advanced qualifications from other marine organisations. But the scenarios that it doesn't take a policeman or a police investigator to look at the scenario and say, yeah, I know how that happened. And in many...
Why do people come to do the advanced driving test?
Why do they do it?
Why, yeah.
Well, it's betterment.
Okay.
Why do people go to university? Because they thirst for knowledge, they want to better themselves, they want to improve themselves. And how much more important would it be to improve yourself as a driver when, let's face it, everyone around this table have got more chance of being killed on the roads than in any other form of transport or anything else apart from being murdered by one of your family members.
So people go voluntarily wanting
yes,
to
so people who can see the
driving.
benefit of it. Now, in some cases, your insurance will also go down. Right?
Okay.
I've actually made a suggestion, and I'm not trying to put anyone in the spot here. Why does not every member of the Environment Committee go out and take some lessons at advanced driving and see how you rate on things that you have to work on and possibly do the test? It's a challenge,
it's
a challenge. Well, why? But why not? Because to be able to legislate on things, surely the goodness the people legislating should be in an authority that is higher than the legislation. So that if we're talking about something to do with the medical profession, someone who's totally lay is going to say, well, I know nothing about brain surgery. We'll have to talk to people who know about brain surgery. And having talked to the people who know about brain surgery, then, yeah, as legislators, then we can bring about legislation to try and improve brain surgery. So, in a like manner, you know, why not do it? Because at the end of the day, it's totally confidential. It's not on YouTube. Cathal will not be shown on YouTube going round and round about the wrong way, in the wrong gear. You know, that type of thing doesn't happen. It's totally confidential. And it's a benefit to everybody. And even people who are going on, who have broken the speed limit, and because they've broken the speed limit, but it hasn't been too high, are given the opportunity to go on a course, a classroom course. Now, my insurance broker confided in me that he had actually been on one recently, and he said, could you please convey my appreciation to the chap who conducted it, who I happen to know, who happens to be an advanced instructor as well, and a motorbike instructor as well. He said, could you pass on my appreciation? He says, I went there not wanting to be there, but he says, when I came out, he says, I realised there was an awful lot of things I didn't know. And one of the things is speed limits. In this country, people think the speed limit on a rural road is 50 miles an hour, or 45 miles an hour, or 40 miles an hour, when the speed limit is 60. So you overtake them at 60, and they've got the horn on, and they're flashing the lights at you as if you're doing something wrong.
Or they go at 80 more like...
Or they go at 80 miles an hour, in which case they end up in a tree at some stage.
Can I just come back about
Yes.
the MOT idea? How often do you think that needs to be done then? If that's a serious proposal, you know...
MOT, well, why not do
Every
it when the
10
licence is due for renewal? Well, 10 years.
Every 10
Why not do it? Personally speaking, I think if you've got a car checked every year, I think there's no reason why. The old saying is the most dangerous nut in a car is the one behind the wheel. And that's an old saying. Just show me age. So why not? Why do we not have some sort of MOT? But what we've suggested is, you know, you don't want to be hammering people with legislation and people going, oh no, I'm going to have to do a driving test every year. We're not talking about a driving test, we're doing about a driver assessment. We take them out. Now, if you find someone who is an absolute lunatic, you know, the first thing you're going to do is ask them to read a number plate. Now, if they can't read a number plate, you're not going to take them out in the car, in which case, I'm sorry, we can't take you out. But if they've passed that amount, they've got a proper licence, you take them out in the car, you see what way they drive, and you give them recommendations, or you let them ask questions. What is an advanced stop line? Well, I'll bring you to where an advanced stop line is, and I'll show you what an advanced stop line is, etc., if you get my drift. So why not, when a person applies for their licence after 10 years, they've forgotten an awful lot of things in 10 years and learned very little.
So do you think then the driver should pay for that? assessment, or should government help to pay for it? You guys will make money out of it, I suppose. So it's
Forget about money. I hate to hear money being mentioned. We're talking
whenever
about
you bring
safety
in
here.
legislation, then you have to think about the bigger picture as
right.
well.
Well,
So
let me answer you in this way. In the Irish Republic, they had this consultation and all sorts of research done, and they reckon that every road death in the Irish Republic costs the state €3 million. Now, someone who is seriously injured is going to cost the state, Northern Ireland, wherever, a heck of a lot more money than that. Someone who is paraplegic is going to have lifetime care. So, if somebody had to spend £50, I'm just saying that, throwing that as a figure, £30, I don't really care what the figure is, but if somebody had to do that, to be signed off as, yeah, you're a safe enough driver. And let's face it, a lot of firms do this now with their drivers because for insurance purposes it has to be done for road safety and to keep their insurance right. And government is actually lacking very, very much behind having this done in their departments because it's now part of EU legislation and it's a duty of care to people who are using the vehicles. So even a secretary who doesn't use her vehicle for business, if her boss turns around and says, you see that letter, would you put that in the post on the way home today? Right away she's doing business, and if she's in a serious road traffic collision, she could actually take her department to court under EU legislation. So advanced driving, additional driving, some sort of every 10 years, whatever the case may be, to make sure that people are up to standard. It's one of the first things you're going to find is if they're blind or not, but also find out about, well, do they know the new things that have come in? Do they understand? Give you an example very quickly. Over the past 2 years, don't quote me on the 2 years, but in and around about that, various pedestrian crossings have come in. In fact, there's one not too far away from Stormont here. And in the old days, we had a zebra crossing, which everybody's familiar with, and we had what's called a pelican crossing, which is the one you go up, you press the button. But we now have got toucan crossings, right? As in the big bird with a coloured beak that advertises a certain black brew that's distributed in many pubs. And we have also got a, let me see the other one. So we've got the zebra, we've got the pelican, we've got the toucan, and we've got the puffin crossing, which is just down the road at Kings Road, which came into existence. I think it was the third one, I think it came into existence. One came into existence in the Ballysillan. Nobody knew what it was all about. They just went and pressed the button and walked across. So it's a completely different system. The vast majority of motorists don't know what they're looking at. And when you ask a motorist about traffic lights, they will tell you the wrong sequence, the way the lights operate. They don't understand, and they don't understand the difference between a traffic light, which is controlling a road junction, and a pedestrian crossing, which is controlled by traffic lights. And they're handled in 2 different ways. I hope this is food for thought. So,
as long as you're not colour blind, you see it's red light, you stop. I think that's the main thing. Okay.
So there's many aspects of education, but also to make sure that people understand and can do those things.
Well, just one. Do you think that the driving instructor should be given the responsibility of recommending that driver then, either for further lessons or that they're okay, or should they go through a formal test every 10 years?
No, I don't think it's necessary to test someone because, I'm being honest with you, this is the problem with testing. The problem with testing is it tests somebody for 30, 40 minutes on a given day when the traffic could be completely dead. It's not intense enough. You go to a roundabout, they might have an empty roundabout and you're asked to turn left. Well, an empty roundabout and turn left, you know, a blind person, I'm not being facetious by saying that, but you understand where I'm coming from, could make that left turn. It's not particularly difficult. A 5-year-old could turn a steering wheel. But if someone is taken out and brought to different roundabouts and different scenarios and different road conditions and things like that, then you find out if a person can drive, and I'm using that term. My mother-in-law, who is still driving, and she's in her 80s, she's not the best, but she's still driving, but she came up with a very, very good sort of quotation, and that was the problem with our roads is there are too many car users and not enough car drivers. Car users versus car drivers. So that's the problem. The driving test has let through people who are all right. But the problem is they don't improve with age. They get worse with age because new legislation comes in. People who were taught in a car without anti-lock braking system don't understand the principle of an anti-lock braking system, and they think anti-lock braking systems are going to help them in the ice, and unfortunately it doesn't.
Okay. All right, Sandra.
Thank you very much. Thanks
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
I'm just aware of
Conscious of
the
time, I understand.
We have 2 more presentations coming on. Cal, just
Thanks,
have
Chair.
your
Just
question?
quickly, Tom, thank you very
Yes.
much. And you did. Here's the reality of it. I mean, people are tested on that day.
Yeah.
It was like an MOT test, car test, or anything else. So, I mean, I don't know about down the route to even test people after a 10-year period, because it could be the same thing. They could do well on the day, and then, you know, it's true that people really start to learn how to drive when they're on their own. They go out on different roads. But the question I do want to ask you about here, let's see, it's great. And doing the test should be about a driver being ready and the driver having the ability to take that test on the day.
Mm-hmm.
So we're saying if we allow people for, and you're right, it was interesting you said that you hold your licence for a year. Like some people could go, especially some rural people in particular who are used to driving tractors.
Yeah.
They could go and do the driving test after 6 lessons and pass it because
Yeah.
of experience.
That's right.
So, in relation to that, what have you to say in relation to the actual proposals on this bill in relation to that? About the year?
About the year, scrap it. It's absolutely nonsensical because you've already stated there are people with good driving attributes. Why should they be held back for a year? Plus, why talk about a year? If you're going to talk about anything, you should be talking about number of driving lessons, i.e. hours, not weeks, months, years, but hours of behind the wheel. Because anybody can hold a licence for 12 months and do 1 hour driving lesson.
Okay.
That doesn't mean they're going to be ready for driving test because they've held a licence for 12 months.
Okay, thank you. And just quickly, you talked a lot of scenarios and it's been very entertaining.
Yes.
Some of the stuff you brought forward. The reality is this: if you factor in the issues of driving collisions, and we have to call them collisions.
Yes.
Word
RTC.
accident now, yeah, the accident issue has been taken away now with the very fact of behaviour.
Yeah.
You have driver behaviour, you have speed, maybe you have drink drive. That's still the main issue.
That's right. Yeah.
So, in terms of your experience, do you feel that there's anything else we can bring forward within this bill?
Within the bill.
Would address those major issues?
Well, the 45 mile an hour, we're totally in favour of that being scrapped. That part of the bill, we're totally in favour of it because we want, and all have said, and this is on record for years, we've said, get rid of it, it's nonsensical. We want to be able to teach people at 60, 70 miles an hour. And that means when they do 60 mile an hour, it's not the first time they've done it. Plus, we will get in to do high-speed braking. So instead of, as the test is at the moment, you're doing about 25 miles an hour when you do the emergency stop. We, at least, driving instructors who are doing the job properly, will be teaching those people to brake from high speeds and also feel how anti-lock braking systems work, because it's important you understand how an anti-lock braking system works and the things that it's not going to help you with, because sometimes braking is a no-no. You can't brake, or your braking has to be very, very delicate. So that's the sort of things that are beneficial with that. As regards to 16.5, not convinced of any benefits whatsoever. More legislation, totally out of sync with mainland, etc., and out of sync with the Irish Republic. And we haven't, nothing's been given to us to prove us otherwise. The scenario as regards, as I said to you, passengers proving who they are, what age they are, what relationship they are to the driver and so on. It's a road in no time as regards enforcement. It's not going to happen, particularly as you say up the country. How often are our police going to be in the area to stop a car at 3 o'clock in the morning with 4 people on it and say, right, what relationship are you and where's your licence and this type of thing? It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So no point legislating for something that in paper looks good, but enforceability is a waste of time. And I think that's the sort of main ones would be the 16.5, the year, and that. The other aspects of it, I think one of the parts of legislation we haven't even mentioned is the quad bike, wearing a helmet, the quad bike. We actually did say we don't see why that legislation hasn't been passed on to trikes, which doesn't really make sense because a quad is actually more stable than a trike is. So the legislation says you must wear, well, you don't have to wear a helmet on a motorcycle, 2 wheels, on a trike, but like what Billy Connolly shoots about on, you don't need to wear a helmet, and that would continue from the proposed legislation. But legislation for somebody using a quad 4-wheel motorbike out on the road, they would have to wear a helmet. So why not the parity there? If we're talking safety, I know from experience a helmet saves your life. Yeah. I can say that categorically, that if I had not been wearing a safety helmet, that a chunk the size of my hand was taken out of, that I would not be here today, because I've had a chunk out of my brain that says I wouldn't be speaking to you today.
Yeah. Okay, Cathal.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, you talk about it should be the hours that can't, but the logbook is supposed to do that.
Sorry?
The logbook to say that, you have done so many hours on various, aspects of driving.
Well, currently we have a logbook for CBT,
okay,
which some instructors are ignoring, even though it's a legal requirement. Now, this has been placed before PSNI, this has been documented as being told to the department, etc., and everybody wants to put their head in the sand and pretend it's not happening. I could tell you where to go to buy a CBT certificate, and the police have been informed about that. You can buy a CBT certificate for £65 and not go and spend any time doing any training whatsoever on a motorcycle. And, this has been an ongoing thing since 2011, where a gentleman was standing outside the City Hall selling these certificates to a scooter rally. We were all going out riding their bikes illegally because they had full car licences but no motorbike licences, so they had to have CBT certificates. So a gentleman standing there selling them for £100 before they go out on the rally. So these type of things are happening, and if anybody thinks that there isn't bad guys among driving instructors, that all driving instructors are good guys and all doctors are not Dr. Shipmans, they're living in Clough-Cuckoo land. There are bad people in all professions. And the problem is, once you get into logbooks, there's going to be people who would be happy to sign off someone who has not properly completed it, simply speaking, for monetary or favouritism, because they know somebody in the family. Could you sign that off? Because I've been taking my son, my daughter out, etc. Okay. The system as is not watertight. Right. We can't see one being watertight for cars.
Okay. A lot more.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very briefly, 2 things. Tom, you say here that you disagree with the age reduction for learners of 16.5.
Yes.
You agree with women at age 17. What about the other end of the age spectrum? Does there come a time in our lives, or an age or a stage, where we should not be driving on these busy cluttered roads?
No.
No.
Because my experience is that some people at 70 are better drivers than some people who are 20 or 30.
So if you're 120 or 106, that's
if you're capable of driving, you're capable of driving. If you can do it, you can do it. Yeah. Age has got no relevance to it. It's to do with ability.
Starting off.
Sorry?
Well, you've said here age has a relevance because you're opposed to it at 16.5.
But what is the point of 16.5? The whole point of this legislation. Well, the whole point of this legislation is to make our roads safer. 16.5 is not going to make our roads safer. No. Someone at 102 years of age who still has a driving licence and can drive capably, they're driving safely. That is the issue. Safety is the issue, not age.
But at 16.5. You don't think they could drive safely?
No, not a matter of that. There's no reason to drop it to 16.5. There's no rationale to drop it to 16.5. Well, if we're going to go to 16.5, why not just drop it to 16? Yeah. Because at 16 years of age, most of the committee won't know this, but at 16 years of age, I teach disabled people who are entitled to a licence.
Yeah, could I just... recently, after another road fatality, the police were asked the question, what is the cause of all these road fatalities? And the senior police officer, I think, answering the question, gave 4 reasons. If my memory serves you right, he said not wearing seat belts was 1, speeding was 2, driving while under the influence 3, and then he said not taking due care.
Attention.
Well,
yes.
To me, not taking due care is wrapped up in the 3. I mean, not wearing your seat belt is not taking care, isn't it? Driving while under the influence. And, of course, speeding. So how do you...
No.
No, it's not
No.
on. Right.
Due care and attention, yes, you could fit that in with that, but the reason that due care and attention is set aside is because the person didn't die because they weren't wearing a seatbelt. The person didn't die because they were speeding. The person didn't die because they were under the influence of drink or drugs. The reason the person died was because they were fiddling about with their MP3 player and didn't see the pedestrian walk out in front of them. Due care and attention. The person drove through a green light thinking that green means go, but they didn't see a cyclist coming off the pavement. Didn't see a cyclist coming off the pavement and killed the cyclist. The lorry driver who makes a left turn and doesn't check his blind spots to make sure that a cyclist, that's the reason for the green boxes, that the cyclist isn't in his blind spot, and as he turns he crushes the cyclist. You know, I have actually seen a Mini crushed and wrapped around an old lamppost because the lorry driver turned like that because he needs to, and the Mini was actually bent round. And I would say I have actually been in attendance at 5, in the past number of years, I've been at 5 RTCs where people have died.
Right,
I've been there.
I think the statistics that we have in relation to, not this year, for we wouldn't have those, but the previous year, where alcohol-related accidents account for a very high proportion of road deaths.
One of the things that we proposed in the booklet that I was talking to, you remember Sandra here, they give a number of scenarios. I don't want to sort of burst somebody else's thunder, you know, but there's a variety of scenarios. One of the scenarios that we have suggested is we're calling it the morning after. I've actually been interviewed on radio, and we've had PSNI on as well. And this is something that people in general don't think about. Recommendation is that if you've had alcohol, forget about drugs, because Dean knows how long drugs could last in your system, but if you've had alcohol, it takes approximately 2 hours for the first unit of alcohol to get out of your bloodstream. It takes a further hour for any other units of alcohol to get out of your bloodstream. Now, I have had occasion where a student got in the car with me in the Holy Lands at 9 o'clock in the morning, and if I had lit a match, the car would have exploded. So at this point I said, were you drinking last night? Yes, I was drinking last night. I said, well, what did you consume? And she went through this rhyme and reason of consume. I said, and the more important thing is, what time did you stop drinking at? 3 o'clock in the morning. That was 6 hours. Now, having consumed a bottle of Jack Daniels and whatever other things was her choice, this person thought they were going to get in a car and drive it. Needless to say, she was sent back home again to go to bed. So the problem is that people don't realise that the recommendation is, and this is something that the members could take into consideration, even if you've had a glass of wine, right, you should leave a minimum of 12 hours before you jump in a car. That's a recommendation. And the problem is the morning after. That is where quite a lot of the convictions take place, and why you'll have quite a lot of RTCs in the morning, particularly in rush hour traffic. The Scandinavians have come up with something that they've seen in they've focused in the brain, that when people commute, i.e. they're on the same journey every day, they switch off a portion of their brain. So this has been scientifically proven. They switch off a portion of their brain, which is basically the one that warns you of danger. So you're driving there, and as I said, I've been saying for years, people drive in a daydream. You know, and in simple terms, they drive in a daydream. Now, you're sitting in a daydream, and you've had a few drinks the night before, but 12 hours has not elapsed. So you're in a daydream, you probably haven't maybe slept very well, and you've had some alcohol in your system. It's a recipe for disaster, because what you're going to do is you're going to crash into the vehicle in front who suddenly brake because you haven't left enough braking distance. So it may not be an RTC where people are injured or seriously injured or killed, but it's still an RTC. It's still on the books as being an RTC, and it also means that other people are held up, production's held up, the economy loses money. Every time there's a blockage in the motorway, the economy in Belfast loses an enormous amount of money due to an RTC.
Yeah. Okay, lot more.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Tom.
You're welcome.
It's been a very interesting conversation with you.
And remember the I didn't use the word challenge. You used the word challenge now about the advanced
I may
driving.
take you up. How do I do
Seriously,
that?
well, why not? You have nothing to lose. You have everything to gain. And you won't even be charged anything. We'll do you special MLA rates.
How much is that?
You know, because there's no money in Stormont, so we'll do special MLA rates. Now, if you want to do the test, that's a different thing, because that's out of our hands, because in that case you're charged. But for the actual, a bit of sort of advanced training to see what it's all about, and being perfectly honest with you, people who do it thoroughly enjoy it.
Good.
And as I say to people, even if you only learn one thing, you've learned something.
Okay. I know I'm not confident reversing. I've never done good reversing. So I might come
What you need to do is buy one of those cars that does it for you. So if you get a pay rise, you'll be able to get one of those ones. You just press the button and let it reverse for you.
I can never do it straight.
Quite an easy technique, believe me.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. Okay.
You're very welcome.
Thank you
Very much for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, members, certainly very interesting issues brought forward by Tom. I think I'm taking away, a few things like driving test maybe is too easy. Maybe we should make the driving test more difficult rather than to say, there must be a whole year for them to do it. But anyway, so that will be for all of us to maybe talk to the officials. Really, when we come back, we're going to start meeting with departmental officials after the Halloween recess. This will be, our last oral briefing on the bill. So after that, then, we did ask the Right to Ride people. They are the motorbike people, is our organisation, but they have declined to come to talk to us. Okay, members. So from now on, then we will move on to consideration of the main issues of the bill. Once we come back, that first week we're going to meet departmental officials on that. Okay. Also, just to let members know that at the last meeting we agreed that the Assembly Research and Education Service would set up an electronic survey, a survey monkey, to gauge the views of young people on the provision of the bill. Members, you have tabled there with you a draft set of questionnaires. I'll give you a minute or so to look at it. It's quite good, quite comprehensive. I have gone through it last night. And
Chair, is it tabled, did you say?
Tabled, on your table pack, and that 64. Is on page 64. It's not very long. It went through mostly impact on young people, really, the changes. Yeah.
Okay.
Happy with that, members? Yeah. And they're going to be sent out to schools then?
Yes, they are.
Yeah. Okay. Is there a deadline for them to come back?
It'll probably maybe be towards the end of November.
Okay.
By the time the schools receive them and get the pupils to complete them, and then they're sent back to research and they analyse all the answers and come back to us with the data.
Because they'll be all off next week probably as well. Yeah.
Going to all schools?
Well, I think we were going to send them out to, well, all secondary level
Secondary
schools.
school, yeah.
And we're also talking about sending them out to the colleges, further education colleges as well. So the education service, I have a list of people, but that's basically it.
Good, Chair.
Could members be provided with the link so that we can put it on our Facebook, Twitter accounts as well, so that
Right.
we
Right, certainly could.
get a wider range of people as well?
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah. The secondary schools will be for the, I'm still onto this form,
Well, we
year
were actually maybe
16.
proposing putting it to children of 14 and
14
over,
upward.
because they would be impacted by the passenger restriction.
Oh, that's true,
Yes.
that's true. Okay, okay, very good. Okay, members, you content with that? Okay, then next item, members, also you have a table paper. This is on the committee inquiry into wind energy. We are going to have a briefing by Windwatch NI members. They had come to us before. You have table paper really just, members, to remind us of our terms of reference, really, just for us to be specific of what we are looking at. Okay. So we are looking at really the adequacy of the PPS 18. We are looking also at wind turbine noise and separation distance, and review the extent of engagement by wind energy providers with local communities. So we just have to be focused on the three issues. Okay, members, and also there are briefing papers provided by Windwatch NI on pages 293 to 248. Sorry, 2489. Sorry, I'm wrong. There's quite a lot of papers from the Windwatch group. So, yeah, two. I won't go. 293. Yep. Okay, you're all very welcome, Professor Alan Evans, Dr. Dan Kane. Yes, hello, and Mr. Owen McMullen, and as well as Mr. Pat Swartz. Just to remind everyone that this session is being recorded by Hansard and will go into our report as well. And very pleased to meet you all again. This is really the final stage now of our inquiry. We are meeting yourself, and then after yourself we're going to meet NIRIC. And from after that, then we are really going to consider writing up and making conclusions and recommendations of our report. So you're very welcome. If you can maybe give us a briefing of 5 to 10 minutes, and I'm sure members would have questions to ask you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's good to be back to meet with you again. What we want to do, bearing in mind the time issue, is to concentrate on areas that perhaps would be of particular help to the committee. And in particular, we feel that this problem, as we see it, is there's the large problem, and then there's the symptoms of the problem, which are the issues of noise and shadow flicker and how PPS 18 is applied. Therefore, we want to commence, if you will, with Mr. Pat Swords, who will talk about the legal framework of the whole issue, and we feel this is crucial that we get this across to why we feel that there's an illegality here and how this will impact on the whole situation.
Yes, I prepared about 8 or 9 slides in advance. I think you have them, do you?
Yes.
Yeah? Just to explain for myself, I'm a fellow of the Institution of Chemical Engineers and a chartered environmentalist. So I've worked in industry for 25 years, both in Ireland and abroad. And from about 1999 on, I spent a considerable amount of period of time, and still doing it, in
Members,
Eastern
the
Europe.
slide starts from pages 309.
Yeah. I spent a considerable period of time, probably 25% of it, in Eastern Europe. So I was helping to bring in the EU's environmental legislation, particularly with pollution control, major accident hazards, training the administration, training industry, and even NGOs and groups on their rights. So that's a pretty unique background that I come from. The second slide is basically the 20% renewable target that the European Union has through this directive of 2009. It was never worked out what was to be built. It was never worked out where it was to be built. It was never worked out what were the impacts, and it was never worked out what the mitigation measures. You can read the recital, the introduction to the directive, tells you how they got the 20% target. They shared it out among the member states based on the existing levels of renewables and a fudge factor based on gross domestic product. So Ireland got 16%. We don't have a lot of hydro. UK 15%. Austria, which has a load of hydro, 34%. That's where it came from. So then they had to rush in. Normally a directive takes 2 or 3 years. This case, it was within a year, had to rush in these National Renewable Energy Action Plans, NREAPs, had to be adopted by June 2010. And all the legally binding environmental assessments and all the public participation at that stage was bypassed. Now, I mean, we are a democracy, so citizens have to be given rights. The environment doesn't belong to the state, it belongs to the citizen, and they have to be given robust procedural rights. And this was recognised back in the Rio Declaration of 1992 in the United Nations. Environmental issues are best handled with participation of all concerned citizens at the relevant level. At the national level, each individual shall have appropriate access to information concerning the environment that is held by public authorities and the opportunity to participate in the decision-making process. And finally, you have to have effective access to judicial and administrative proceedings, including redress and remedy. So that was the goal. So in the European Union, the greater area, which is the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, stretches out into Central Asia and non-EU member states. We have a thing called the Aarhus Convention, which has been part of European law since 2005. Basically what happened was all of that Rio Declaration was codified into a legal act and adopted. And it's based on access to information, public participation in decision-making, and access to justice in environmental matters. So some of the European Union legislation was changed, but it doesn't matter. The core principles that are not specifically written in are still binding. So myself, seeing what I can only describe as a completely dysfunctional programme to plaster the Republic of Ireland with 3,000 turbines and 6,000 kilometres of high-voltage lines, never been through any assessment. So I was not in a position to challenge in the courts in Ireland because of the costs, and Ireland wouldn't ratify the convention. The only member state that didn't have it done so. But it was part of European law, and as I had documented all of these issues, the United Nations then took a case in my name in which they investigated the European Commission. And that was ruled on the 16th of August 2012 by the Compliance Committee, the Legal Tribunal in Geneva, that the EU did not comply with the provisions of the Convention in connection with its 20% renewable energy by 2020 programme and its implementation throughout the 20 member states through these national renewable energy action plans. It had never put the necessary structures in place to carry out the assessments, engage with the public and provide the information to the public. I was also involved, the next slide is related to a Scottish communication. I was back in Geneva, where I helped present it with the Community Council up in Scotland, where we took in the European Union and the United Kingdom again. And the ruling came out there that again the United Kingdom's National Renewable Energy Action Plan did not comply with the public participation requirements of the Article 7 of the Convention. The Article 7 of the Convention is the assessment of the plan or programme. The necessary information was not provided to the public, and the public were provided with no opportunity to engage in public participation with this plan or programme before it was adopted by the United Kingdom. So there's two rulings. So those are the Compliance Committee. So we move on to the next one, is compliance mechanisms. There is a meeting of the parties, which is when all the 47 countries that have now ratified the Convention come in. It occurred in July this year in Maastricht. So once the findings and recommendations of the Compliance Committee are endorsed by the meeting of the parties, they are a binding part of international law, which de facto is community law and national law. And as they said about the first case against the European Union, they expressed its concern whether a proper regulatory framework and our clear instructions for implementing Article 7 of the Convention with respect to the adoption of these national renewable energy action plans, and it remains unclear how the party concerned will adopt the manner in which it evaluates these national renewable energy action plans in accordance with the recommendations of the committee. Since 2012, the European Union has done nothing to comply and bring itself into compliance. So it now has to report in this December and every 10 months as to what it's doing. And then that this will be brought back into the legal process at the next meeting of the parties, and if the European Union keeps on refusing to comply, it will be thrown out of the Convention. Quite rightly so too. Okay. So if we move on to the Aarhus Convention and European Union law, it's an integral part of community law. Under community law, an international agreement is binding on the community institution and the member states and takes precedence over legal acts adopted by the community. And we have a current legal case going on in my name in the Irish High Court over this National Renewable Energy Action Plan. There's actually 7 other judicial reviews going on in the High Court in relating to planning decisions on renewables in Ireland, and there's a judicial review forthcoming and being started in Scotland. So we have to ask ourselves, is the Irish Renewable Energy Programme proportionate? Is it reasonable? What are we trying to do? Because we never assessed it. And the only reason why we've got so far with it is that buzzwords have sufficed and the legal assessments bypassed. The public authorities don't have the information they are required to possess by law. Once assessed, it is nothing but completely disproportionate and dysfunctional. Sorry, I don't agree that a percentage of my electrons in my house being renewables actually amounts to anything. As we were pointing out in the Compliance Committee, under cross-examination with the Scottish Communication, what are we trying to achieve? What's the environmental protection? What does a tonne of carbon dioxide actually do and save? How many proper tonnes of carbon dioxide are we saving? Not wild, spurious claims which do not take account of the inefficiencies. And all that Jean-Francois Breakland, who is head of legal enforcement and commission for DG Environment, can come up with. If we were to take instead 110 high wind turbine, 110 high metal statue Mickey Mouse, you would not be expected to do a detailed carbon assessment on that. So why do you expect a detailed carbon assessment for the wind turbine? And you know what? I wasn't the least bit surprised, because the European Union doesn't have any data. Nobody does. They don't know what a tonne of carbon dioxide is actually doing in terms of pounds, shillings and pence. So if we look at the Planning Appeals Commission here in Northern Ireland on the Dromedara wind farm, the legal requirement of the Convention is that public participation takes place when all options are open. So does the European Union's Environmental Impact Assessment Directive. States it, when all options are open. So when you see the Planning Appeals Commission saying the performance of wind turbines, general criticisms of wind power in general were raised by the objectors. However, such criticisms are inappropriate for consideration in the context of this individual appeal. For example, the question of whether wind turbines are more or less efficient or cost-efficient relative to other power sources is a matter of national and regional policy review. General concerns about wind farms, green credentials and carbon release impacts are similarly beyond the scope of this appeal. Sorry, it's a law. When all options are open, the citizen is entitled to raise these issues. If they have not been addressed at the prior level, at the prior tier, then the citizen is entitled to raise them at that point. That's the law. Your Planning Appeal Commissioners don't know the law, don't care. Secondly, it is the obligation of the Planning Appeal Commissioners as a decision maker to have those assessments prepared by himself of what exactly this wind turbine is doing. That's his obligation, to assess it. Not the developer's statement, but his obligation under law to assess it and make that available. Clear breach of law. If the lawyers came in and started tearing you apart, you'd be in severe problems. Finally, even if we look at the European Union's own documentation, which is now recognising that these targets won't be met. They've had to scrap the 10% renewable fuels target. It was causing too much loss of food prices soaring, damage to environments. So we now have something like half the member states already recognise won't even approach these targets by 2020. As the EU's report says, for the UK, it is not expected that its 2020 target can be achieved under baseline conditions, as we're proceeding at the moment. Predicts a renewable energy share of 7.8% versus a target of 15% set in the EU directive. So we're not going to make it. And what has been achieved so far? Nothing. There's been no increase in temperatures in 18 years. Even if the whole of the European Union's plan worked, and it hasn't in terms of reducing carbon emissions, we'd only be looking at a 1% reduction. Okay? That's my contribution.
I think the point we're trying to make here, Madam Chairman, is that if the whole situation is illegal from the start, then everything that flows from it, PPS 18, the assessment methodology, all of that also is faulty. We know that there's an issue of transcription of European transcription of European law into Northern Ireland regulation. That has not been done properly. The planning, environmental assessment impact regulations here are not compliant with the European law. We also know that at the level below the law, PPS 18 is not being properly carried out by the planners. They are not even following the faulty policy that is in place. And that's not acceptable anyway. And they're using faulty policies below that, such as ETUS R97. They're not using it properly. They are not applying even the PPS 18 separation distances adequately. Therefore, for example, there's no minimum separation distance being applied in the case of single turbines. If we had the time, I could prove to you from the original documentation for the draft of PPS 18 that it was applied to single turbines as well as to wind farms. Yet in cases, we've got turbines which are 100 metres from people's front door. The health impacts, you're being told by the industry, and I've seen some of the material provided to you by officials, that there are no health impacts. There is no evidence that there are no health impacts. None whatsoever. The evidence shows that there are different types of health impacts, and if we have time, perhaps Professor Evans would like to comment on that.
Is that an invitation? Thank you. Yeah. I have read the submissions made to this committee previously in the shape of the Chief Environmental Health Officer, who suggested that ETSU R97 was out of date and needed to be reviewed, and also the evidence presented excellently by your wisely chosen acoustics expert, who said more or less the same thing, but added that she considered that there were also health problems. I do consider that there are health problems associated with wind turbines. Wind turbines are noisy. They're being put too close to human habitation. The big thing they're doing is keeping people awake. We can argue about the particular frequency of the sound being produced. They're noisy enough in the audible range. In the infrasound range, which classically is inaudible, there is increasing evidence that the human brain is capable of perceiving it, not as sound, but as a sensation, which is disturbing. The net effect of this, and even the report commissioned by Alex Salmond from the quartet of acousticians in Salford, admitted that sleep disturbance and possibly sleep deprivation was a problem. There were no other health problems. But once you're into sleep deprivation and sleep disturbance, you are enter into a very serious range of health problems. In children, you're into impaired memory and a tendency to produce obesity, which tracks on into later life, predisposes particularly to cardiovascular disease. In adults, problems with memory, defects in cognition, but most importantly, cardiovascular disease. And there are a number of these. The weight of the evidence in relationship between sleep deprivation and cardiovascular disease, stroke, heart attacks, heart failure, is large. And I'm very worried about this. The assurances being given are not good enough. We need studies, yes, we are understanding mechanisms, and as I say, I have a long history, particularly in cardiovascular epidemiology. I worked for WHO for at least 25, 30 years. I have an interest in cardiovascular disease, and I have great concerns about what is going on. Thank you.
Okay.
I would just like to say that Mrs. Ursula Walsh, the acoustic expert from the University of Ulster, confirmed that the SU guidelines are not fit for purpose. This was also highlighted by the Environmental Health Officer, Chris Jordan, in their presentation to you as well. The SU guidelines do not cover wind shear, which creates the occurrence of amplitude modulation, infrasound, ice throw, reflected light or shadow flicker, nor does it consider residential amenity. The current setback distance is of 10 times the rotor diameter, or 500 metres from a wind turbine to a dwelling, is not based on any scientific proof or medical evidence to suggest that is a safe practice. When I asked a representative from DARD at a presentation of theirs on wind energy, where was their scientific proof or medical evidence to prove that 10 times the rotor diameter or 500 metre setback distance from a wind turbine to a dwelling was safe, his reply was it was based on a rule of thumb. Mrs. Walsh also referred in her presentation to the fact that Northern Ireland has become a dumping ground for second-hand wind turbines, which are perhaps no longer acceptable in other countries, but seem to be okay to be sold here. They've been refurbished and they're being littered all around our countryside. Obviously, those wind turbines have the wear and tear and have indentations and holes in their rotors which make them more noisier. And Mrs. Walsh also confirms that noise from wind turbines is much worse than industrial noise pollution and road traffic noise. Now, earlier this year, we saw in the BBC report that over £135 million has been paid out in compensation and legal fees to members of the PSNI, over 8,000 members of the PSNI who have suffered hearing loss in the line of duty, with another 2,000 cases still to be heard. Now, with that precedent as well and now truly being established, there are people who are now living in Northern Ireland, around the countryside, going to be susceptible to hearing loss because of the current guidelines do not protect them from the infrasound and the noise emitted from wind turbines, and there's going to be litigation cases further down the line. We'd also like to urge the Environment Committee to now impose immediate embargo imposed upon the processing of all planning applications for wind farms and single wind turbine proposals, and as a cessation to those in the construction process until proper updated guidelines have been drafted, consulted upon with all the relevant stakeholders and introduced by the Assembly. A policy of strict adherence to all EC regulations and legislation must be introduced with immediate effect. I'd also like to refer to the presentation by the DOE. I want to make a couple of comments there. Mrs. Deirdre McSorley, when she was asked, is there ever such a thing about saturation point and cumulative impact? And she says that, and I quote, we do take in the cumulative impact of wind turbines in the area, and there will be areas where they have reached saturation point. Our colleague Mr. Kirk from the DOE also says, and I quote, I am not aware that it is illegal under any European law. I am not quite sure which European law they were talking about when they were asked a question by an MLA on the regulations of European legislation. We have the presentation that was made by the Environmental Health also confirms that the SU guidelines are not fit for purpose, and they also say about the strategic planning has really not been adequate enough to protect the amenity of the countryside and of the citizens that enjoy rural life. Dr. Chris Jordan, when he was asked the question about, just refer to page 17, about how many wind turbines are in use in Northern Ireland. He said he thought it was about around 200, with 1,000 also being permitted. Just to confirm on that point, as of the 31st of August, 3,530 applications for single wind turbines have been made, of which 2,413 have been decided. Of that, 2,125 single wind turbines have been approved, with a further 631 pending. In addition to that, there's been 175 wind farm applications, of which 111 of those have been decided, of which 96 have been approved, with a further 54 pending. Now, when Mr Jordan was asked about the health impacts, referred to the question he was asked to by Mr McGuinness, are you giving a health warning? And Mr Jordan's reply was yes. Now, cumulative impact. This is a map of Northern Ireland. You may not be familiar with it, but that was printed as of the end of August. Now, if that is not cumulative impact, I don't know what is.
Would it be possible to pass that map around?
Certainly, by all means, yeah. And I also have a single, in addition to that, it cannot be transposed in the same map as the location of wind farms. In addition to that, we have SONI have plans then to transfer the power from wind turbines onto the grid, and we have a map of Northern Ireland which shows the corridor of the pylons with overhead cables and additional substations. This has been done without any proper community engagement or public consultation. People living in those properties that's going to be along that route, people living in properties quite close to wind turbines which has been forced upon them against their will, who are now in negative, now seeing the value of their properties being decreased. Sometimes they've actually deemed to be unsaleable. I have here a copy from a statement from an estate agent in Ballymena relating to the sale of property in Brushane in County Antrim, where the said property was put on the market in January of this year. Sale was agreed on the 12th of March 2014, whereupon solicitors were instructed. When the purchasers discovered the planning application for Elginny Hill Wind Farm had been brought to their attention, after some discussion and negotiations with these purchasers, they eventually decided not to proceed with the purchase of this house, and it felt it would not be in their best interest to purchase a property with close proximity to such a development. So here we have the evidence in black and white that in cases of homes located in close proximity to wind turbines, not only are their property values being devalued, but in some cases the property has been deemed unsaleable. And this property that I refer to was put on the market on the 20th of May of 2014, and to date we have received no offers on the same. While the planning service is on the guidelines been just referred back to being not fit for purpose, serious questions must now be asked of our Environment Minister, the DETI Minister and the Health Minister and their respective departments for rolling out a government policy that fails to protect the basic human rights of rural communities throughout Northern Ireland. And who will pick up the tab for the inevitable consequential compensation claims that is going to follow? I also note from the Hansard reports there to Mrs Walsh from the Ulster University, when she was asked about the response for ongoing noise monitoring to be conducted by wind energy developers. Well, this would be completely unacceptable. That would be like asking the fox to guard the henhouse. This should be conducted by a firm of appropriately qualified independent consultants.
Sorry, I missed that, but can you repeat that? Go on.
Yeah, Mrs Walsh, she was asked about, in her brief, whether developers should carry out ongoing noise monitoring. To suggest that the wind energy developers be responsible for ongoing noise monitoring would be completely unacceptable. That would be like getting the fox to guard the henhouse. This should be conducted by a firm of appropriately qualified independent consultants.
Can I just make a comment there?
Yes,
Yes. I think this is a crucial point, Madam Chairman and members. There has never been any compliance testing of any wind farm in Northern Ireland since the first turbines went up. No proper compliance testing at all. So do they say what it says on the tin? We don't know, because nobody goes back to see, did they create the number of jobs claimed? Did they reduce CO2? Is CO2 even being measured? Did they reduce the amount of electricity that was claimed for them? Are there complaints of noise around them? Are there health effects? We notice from questions that have been asked by members to other people who have come to speak to you that you've asked questions on health. Are there any records of people being affected in their health? Nobody has been tasked with gathering that information. Who do you go to? You don't go to Environmental Health. They're not responsible for health. The Public Health Agency believe that they simply translate what is happening in England. So there's an issue there right away.
The Strategic Environmental Assessment legislation in the European Union, which is in the Member State law since 2004, requires for such a programme on energy that not only should the programme have been assessed before and public participation before it was adopted, but it should have been subject to monitoring for unforeseen adverse environmental effects. That is the precise word used in the legislation. The fact that your authorities here have not a scrap of evidence that they've ever done that since, and the thousands of wind turbines built on this island, is just an incredible legal breach, particularly as we are seeing that there are problems coming forward.
Okay. Yeah, well, thank you very much for your presentations. But I think you have to accept that we're too dependent on fossil fuel, on gas and oil, which are going to end in 50, 60 years' time. And we do have a programme of government target for, 2020 of 35%. So, I mean, that's set in the programme for government that we all have to strive for. So, I mean, there is that
just on that
requirement.
Point, Madam Speaker, just on that point, Madam Speaker, the wind industry claim that all these wind farms and wind turbines that are lit around our countryside will decrease our dependency on fossil fuels and decrease our electricity bills. There's no evidence to suggest that, when our dependency on fossil fuels has actually increased. And if you take during the summertime and even in September, 100% of our Northern Ireland fuel mix was actually being generated by fossil fuels, and wind wasn't contributing anything at all to the NI fuel mix. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I haven't got all the figures here, but I think there is evidence that we are now using a lot of renewable energy, more than before, on generating electricity. I think that is a fact.
Okay, can I explain this? Okay, first of all, okay, none of you have an entitlement to engage in a plan or programme of this nature without going through the necessary assessments, the cost-benefit, consideration of alternatives. Opinions are irrelevant. It has to be done within the legal bounds of a transparent and fair process. That didn't happen. Every step of the way, the procedures were bypassed. Now, I don't need to have a lecture on how to design energy infrastructure. I know how to do it. I'm professionally qualified in it. What we want to see is something that is done according to the law in a professional manner, which can be scrutinised by the public and which can be agreed on. That gives you the transparency and basically the buy-in of the public. Now, as regards claims about percentage of renewable energy, because of the intermittent nature of renewable energy, I mean, my mother can figure it out. She's in her 80s and no college education. But as she says, how do you expect me to cook a turkey for Christmas when I'm waiting around for the wind to blow? And there's electricity in the oven. The massive instabilities on the grid, just because you have 20% renewables, doesn't mean you're getting 20% fuel savings or 20% carbon dioxide savings. Yeah. You're actually getting less than half of that. And as you put more of them on, you get even less. Now, we as engineers know that, and the engineering institution, the Academy of Engineers of Ireland, senior engineers are telling you all over the place to go and assess this and get it right. And it's not just that you have to go and do this, you have a legal obligation to provide this information so that we don't end up with the European Union official under cross-examination in Geneva when he starts talking about Mickey Mouse and carbon analysis of the statute.
I'll bring in others. Cahill?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. Very in-depth.
Yeah.
But to be fair, I mean, just a couple of questions, because to be honest with you, the target issue, and this for one reason, if you're going to set a target, no matter what it is, it's achievable.
Exactly.
And I think there has to be question marks over it first.
Yeah.
But I want to go down this way because I want to tease this out with you. And I mean, you're talking about law.
Yeah.
And what's legal and what law are we looking at here? Because and I'll explain myself here because here's the story. It's not that I have an issue with European law, okay? I think what we should do is follow certain practices and best standards, and if it's set in Europe, that's grand.
Yeah.
But also have to recognise that as a member state or an authority, whatever devolved government is, they have certain policies, okay? And if you look at it in the round, in this case, and we'll use this example, whether you believe PPS 18 is good, bad or indifferent, it is there at the minute, right? Now, I've heard all the arguments been good, but I just want to touch because, see, you're saying it's a legal matter, and we have policy here, and you say that policy, are you saying that policy is illegal according to European law, or could you expand a wee bit that, because, and then I'll get on to some of that ETSU and all the other issues, because it's important for to go down this line.
Yeah, I mean, any type of structure and will evolve, okay, and people react to the situation. And I mean, basically, in the 70s and 80s, it was recognised worldwide that developments were being rushed in projects, maybe a bridge here or a power station there, an oil refinery there. And we came up with, you know, not only in Europe but in the United States, with the principle of environmental impact assessment, which was to assess the project, to inform the decision making, and the methodology and the tools we use for that. So the next stage of that was that it then became obvious that this was deficient, in the sense that if the bridge was part of a big motorway network, or the power station was part of a big massive rollout of energy infrastructure, you had to assess the next level up, which was the plan. So we started bringing in legislation to strategically environmental assess at the plan or programme level, in a more holistic viewpoint of, you know, instead of having a motorway network, would you increase some of the rail network modalities of transport? That's a simple one, okay? So that has been applied worldwide, and that is part of European legislation and also adopted at member state level, both of those. The first one at the project level since 1985, and the other one since implemented since programme level since 2004. But because of the fallout of Eastern Europe and the legacy of Ceausescu and all of this and unsuitable development, there was a strong desire that this wouldn't happen again. And they took the Rio Declaration at the UN and they brought it in to this Aarhus Convention, which is overriding outside of the European Union area and extending way beyond it. And it was that the public should be given rights. So the public should be part of a transparent and fair process, and that it should be proceduralised. It doesn't say nuclear power is bad or good, it doesn't say wind power is good or bad, but that if you do it in a structured manner, providing the information, the public participation at the plan level, at the project, you know, at the top level and at the programme level, and then you provide them access to recourse to justice, which is a challenge issues, which has to be that they can bring in the factual basis into the courts and challenge it in a manner which is not prohibitively expensive, which the UK is not complied with and is under compliance hearings at the moment in the European Court and at Geneva. So I mean, this is the approach. I mean, you have to give the public rights, because, you know, when a populist wave disappears or when a government changes after 20 years, they are left with this stuff around them in the landscape. Derelict plants, you know, and we have to protect them and give them rights. And democracy is about bringing out the talents. It's not just that the authorities, you know, in the Planning Appeals Commission are the only one with knowledge. There are plenty of other people out there, particularly people in the local area, or may even be more expert in planning than the planners themselves.
Okay. No, because we could talk and argue all day about this, because that would mean, going on some principles, that would mean we'd never get into a car, we'd never drive down the road, you know what I mean? But I'll not get into there's loads of arguments, but I want to go back to the point, because, and it's interesting you say that, and that's why I asked about the legal side of it.
Yeah.
Right, okay. I want to go on to another point in relation to, we have this policy, and we found out, and I would like to thank my colleague who brought this issue to the committee in the first place. ATUR 97 seems to be a major issue now for us in terms of the last presentation
for a long time.
Because we've heard in past presentations about, we weren't too sure whether one argument for it wasn't fit for purpose, but we've now seen in the expert, and from what I'm hearing from different people now, it certainly hasn't been, and it's been part of the assessment process in allowing. And it should have been clearly, and that will be reflected in the report. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. But interestingly, I just want to talk about the other, and that's one issue, and I know we're going to reflect it in the report. The other issue is the setback distances, and whether or not you've felt that the PPS 18 has been adhered to, because it's 500 metres for wind farms, and this nominal 10 times the rotor diameter. Now, I don't know where that exactly come, or how that all come about.
Well, I can tell you exactly where that came from. It was the civil servants' approach to trying to combine a proposal for shadow flicker, 10 times the rotor diameter, and the 500-metre minimum separation distance. The story goes like this. It's in the document, Devastation, Delusion, the whole story. But basically it goes like this. Whenever the wind industry came, remember, the wind industry asked for PPS 18 to be written, and indeed wrote it. And that has been admitted here. It's in Hansard Records by Stephen Hamilton. Now, when they came along to look at a separation distance, they had a stakeholders group. And out of that stakeholders group, they left environmental health out. They weren't involved. So there was nobody to give any noise expertise at all except the wind industry. Strangely enough, we ended up with ETS-UR 97. But the Chief Environmental Health Officers Group were extremely annoyed about this and wrote in and basically said, look, there's an issue here of the separation distance, the minimum separation distance. Now, ETSU, and indeed, Dorothy, you've got that page 46? Yeah. Page 46 of ETSU itself gives a works example on which the proposed separation distance is based. And we've actually got copies here if you want to look. Simply as an illustration that I'm not making this up. They used a single turbine as the illustration, not a wind farm, but a single turbine. And what they said was that the equivalent of a 101 decibel single turbine would not reach the noise standard of 35 decibels at 437 metres. At that distance, it would still be 38 decibels. Now, as you know, for a single turbine, the simple method of assessing noise is to simply say, will it or will it not meet 35 decibels? Well, here they were saying that at 437 metres in 1996, that this would not get down to the low level that they needed. So the Chief Environmental Health Officers Group came back and said, therefore, for 437, we say you should have a minimum of 500 metres. Now, they said that in 2008. But in 2004, the people who wrote ETSU had already decided that that should be 700 metres. But the Chief Environmental Health Officers Group didn't seem to know that. So the 500 metres was based on the example of a single turbine. Now, this has been confirmed to me by the people who actually scribed PPS 18, who wrote it, because the public consultation was put on the website, all the responses, there were 90-odd responses, and they clearly state that the 500 metres minimum separation distance applied to wind energy installations, not wind farms. Now, if you go one step further and say, right, okay, and all the planners, Western Group, all the groups are using the 500 metres only for wind farms. So if you take that view, that it only applies to wind farms because that's the term they've used, then you can't use ETSU for single turbines, because it is the assessment and rating of noise from wind farms. So if you say farms means not for single turbines, then the assessment and rating of noise for wind farms also doesn't apply to single turbines. And this is the rub. I mean, you've asked a very perceptive question here. Here's the rub. Rural communities, in fact, the whole of Northern Ireland had a very robust noise standard called BS 4142. All environmental health, right across the UK and the Republic, all used this because it worked. It was a method of assessing the likelihood of annoyance being caused to the neighbours of any noise source, industrial noise sources. Now that is still there, it's still in use, but wind farm noise is different. It was given a special dispensation. So irrespective of any other factor, rural communities across Ireland, across England, Scotland and Wales are already suffering a penalty by not allowing BS 4142 to be used for wind farms. If you ran the two in parallel, you'll find that ETSU allows a far greater level of noise for neighbours of wind farms and wind turbines than does the original standard of BS 4142. So the 500 metres was definitely based on a single turbine situation. We are told by the planners that it doesn't apply, yet they're still applying 10 times the rotor diameter, which is also supposed to be only for wind farms. The 10 times the rotor diameter, as I say, was based on shadow flicker. The piece of research it was based on was a paper by A.D. Clark for the Open University in 1991. The details are in Devastation and Delusion that you have. The quote in PPS 18 is wrong. It is actually wrong. They have misinterpreted the piece of research, which does not say that 10 times the rotor diameter will solve the problem of shadow flicker. It says that if you live to the east, southeast, west, southwest, and so on, that it definitely will not, and that you have to have much greater separation distances. And indeed, we gave some video evidence to the committee. I believe it hasn't worked, and we'll replace that. But it clearly shows shadow flicker, serious shadow flicker indoors and outdoors at 30 plus times the rotor diameter. And indeed, assessments by wind farms in various places, Wolf Bog for example in County Antrim, shows that the worst affected house was at 15 times the rotor diameter, but that 22 times the rotor diameter was also being badly affected, and indeed 33 times. So none of these factors are correct. The method of dealing with separation distances is frankly wrong. And that is why, to try and clarify this, we were calling for a minimum separation distance of 2 kilometres. And then we can take the position, the safe position, that if a developer can prove to us and to yourselves that there is no impact by moving closer, because topography and so on would intervene, well then you may consider less than 2 kilometres. But with the present method of dealing with separation distances, there are people who are being exposed to torture. I mean, we all know about the UN Convention on Torture. And if you remember back to the 70s and 80s, when young people used to gather around shopping centres, we had this little device that was put up on the wall, and it emitted low-frequency noise. That's what's coming from wind turbines that are close to homes. This low-frequency noise, and there's a video clip that you have there showing a snowstorm, and the industry sat here with you on the 12th of September, and they said there was no problem with low-frequency noise. Not only is there a problem, their chief executive of Vestas admitted it. And that video clip clearly shows the low-frequency noise, because you can see the spirals of noise as the blade passes the tower. So there are major issues where people are now being exposed to what is basically torture. And this is something that we will be forced to explore if this issue is not resolved.
Nearly afraid to ask another question. Just allow me one more wee question. In terms of the health issues, I mean, I want to ask you, say, in terms of practice elsewhere, because there's been wind turbines all over the world. I mean, are you saying there's evidence there in relation to that?
There's peer-reviewed studies around the globe.
Okay.
We're not making this stuff up. But people, I have actually witnessed people in their own homes. They're suffering in their own homes because of the impacts of wind turbines being forced upon them and too close to their homes.
Okay. And just quickly, in terms of compliance, I mean, John, you mentioned compliance. I mean, on the approval of any application, obviously there's conditions with it. I mean, we're going to be reactionary now in terms of asking for compliance and checks and everything else. Where do you see that process going?
Some of the compliance is very easy to do. There's a piece of software developed in New Zealand that will allow the calculation of the exact noise that's being produced by a wind turbine on a wind farm. What we're asking for, among other things, is we think it would be a very worthwhile experiment to try the different types of assessment methodology side by side at the same site and then compare the results. So, for example, ETSU plus BS 4142 plus, for example, the Institute of Acoustics Good Practice Guide, which again has got a lot of the same faults that are in ETSU. There's never been a proper assessment. But, for example, the economic benefits. Now, I have again, I don't want to bother you with too much paper today, but I have a report here for a 54 megawatt wind farm down in County Fermanagh, where it clearly shows that it has no employees. There's 54 megawatts, there's an income from all the electricity, there's no employees. So where were the 30 jobs or whatever that were claimed for that wind farm? Where have they gone? Incidentally, it also says that they expect the turbines only to last for 15 years, not 25. So there's a lot of issues there. CO2, who measures it? I wrote to DETI and asked them who assesses the claims made by developers for the CO2 savings from their wind farms. Nobody. Nobody. These are not proper claims that are ever checked out, and indeed, as in the case of shadow flicker and so on, there's nobody has the competence within planning to do these things. They're not passing them on to other organisations in government who can look at these issues. So there's a major compliance issue to test, and even to look, for example, at this issue of health. I'll pass this on to you if you don't mind. This is a device that was used recently to prove the problem caused by wind turbines on sleep. This is a little device called a Zeo, and you wear a headband at night. Alan could tell you how this all works in terms of brainwave patterns. But what it shows is that when the person lived near or stayed near the wind farm, they had a certain quality of sleep. And when they went away from the wind farm, the quality of sleep improved very, very significantly. Now, this turns the brainwave patterns into a score. So this is something that is actually scientifically applicable and will demonstrate that even though you're not necessarily being wakened up, the value of the sleep that you're getting is actually being destroyed by the low frequencies, the amplitude modulation. All those things that are coming from the turbine are not even being measured at all by ETSU. ETSU, as you know, only use the A-weighted scale. It does not, therefore, look at low frequencies, and it doesn't take any account of amplitude modulation. And these are two of the major issues with wind turbines.
And there's no provision to measure at night or inside the, shall we say, the subject's or sufferer's house, because the sound may be worse inside the house than outside it.
Yeah, low frequency.
Thank you very much.
I think I'm well of the time. Barry,
Okay, thank you, Chair.
big question.
Can I ask, did I pick Dan up properly when he suggested that a minimum separation distance between a wind turbine and a dwelling would be 2 kilometres? And secondly, just a note that you provided a video clip to us of shadow flicker. What's the main point you're making with respect to the shadow flicker issue?
The original separation distance of 10 times the rotor diameter was set on the basis of that piece of research about shadow flicker. But that piece of research was incorrect. And just to give you an illustration of that, 10 times the rotor diameter, if the diameter of the turbine is, say, 20 metres, there's a tower, 20-metre blade. You can have towers of different height with the same blades. Therefore, the turbine is getting higher and higher, the sun is being cast further and further towards your home, but the blades are identical. Therefore, the separation distance, according to PPS 18, will still remain the same. So that's obviously a fault in the original research. The research has got a whole series of problems in it, but that's where the 10 times the rotor diameter came from. What we're saying is that it is clear that that was wrong when it was written. It was wrongly transposed into PPS 18. It was misquoted, actually. And that the evidence is that shadow flicker can be cast for great distances. And indeed, work by people looking at epilepsy research on this issue, Professor Harding and his team at Aston University, have shown that the intensity of the light from the shadow flicker only reduces when you get, believe it or not, 100 times the hub height away from the turbine. So you're talking about kilometres. So there's an issue there right away. The other issue then is noise itself. There's no measurement of what we've got is theorising here. You will find that both the applicant for a wind farm or wind turbine and indeed environmental health, they will not actually measure the noise generally. All they will do is to estimate it. Nobody ever goes back afterwards and to see if that was actually an accurate representation. And indeed in the Dromedara application that Pat mentioned here, the complaints about noise were made in 2007 and have still not even been investigated properly. So there's issues there that environmental health are just not equipped to do this. Now, what do you do in that situation? You give yourself a safety zone. And the safety zone of 2 kilometres has been recommended by noise experts all over the world, as indeed is the rule of thumb that's in use in Scotland. And I'm sure you're aware that at the moment they're consulting on moving it out to 2.5 kilometres. So that's an issue in terms of wind farms, of having an adequate separation distance that will give that safety margin until some sensible resolution of compliance testing has taken place.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Certainly a lot of information for us to take away. The legality bit, I think we need to talk to the department and the executive. But certainly, thank you very much for your input.
Could I just ask one question from Dr. Kane? It has challenged a number of issues contained within PPS 18. I think that you talk there, you spoke of, and it was interesting, another member has raised it here, the separation distance, and was, I think you're, what, 2 kilometres, is it?
Up to 2.
Up to 2. If PPS is inaccurate here, what are we doing to address that? Because surely, to goodness, we need. I think you said that some of the statements contained within PPS 18 are just, and I think are wrong. I think that's what you've said.
They are.
Am I not right?
But remember, when the citizen brings an analysis to the planning department, okay, all options are open for effective public participation. The planning then to go around and trivialise it, get lost, we have our plan.
Yeah.
That's a breach of law.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's really my question.
It's a breach of decency too. Yeah.
But surely we're not going to be subject then to in the future working from a PPS 18 that is patently inaccurate.
That's already happening. That is already happening, and there are people. That is already happening.
An example of a particular inaccuracy. This was lifted directly from the British Wind Energy Association's website, I believe, and just put into PPS 18 that no member of the public has ever been injured by the proper operation of a wind farm. That was false. That was a false statement when it was made. It's even more false now. At the time it was made, there had already been 44 deaths. Now, maybe death doesn't count as injury, I don't know. But there had been 44 deaths that were known. At the last count, 30th of June this year, there's been 151 deaths. I think 90 of them have been wind farm industry workers, but the rest are members of the public or people who are just passing by in one form or another, or single turbine operators. So there's a patent untruth. And therefore, the separation distance, and most of these deaths, most of the accidents that occur around wind farms, and there have been over 1,500 in the UK in a 5-year period, most of those accidents are caused by the thing that you're told can't happen. Breaking of the blades being flung off, collapse of the tower, fire, and so on and so forth. these things happen in significant numbers. A piece of research done by Edinburgh University just this year has shown that you would expect at least 117 turbines to burn down each year across the world. Now, we're not saying that generally a member of the public can expect to get a lump of wind turbine blade on the head. What we are saying is that when you're looking at separation distances, this has to be an issue, because the government's own health and safety laboratory did tests on pieces of blade being thrown off, and they worked out distances of nearly 1,500 metres for the piece being thrown. So these are the distances that you have to take into account, and that's why we're talking about 2 kilometres. Now, the other interesting thing about that is the industry will tell you, because everything, as you know, is subordinated to the 40% target. The industry will tell you that if you put 2 kilometres around all these turbines, we'll not have any. Well, now, all I can say is that in Germany, now, say we have under ETSU, we have a very high nighttime standard of 43 decibels, which is totally against the World Health Organization's guidance. Germany at night has 35. They have 35 at night and up to 40 during the day, as we can have up to 40 during the day. They have twice the population density in Northern Ireland, yet they don't seem to have any problem at all in actually having wind energy. It's not working for them, but in having the turbines, that is not an issue. And they can give that sort of comfort zone and still, with a higher population density, deal with wind turbines. But we're not doing that. We are putting the public last in this procedure. We think the public, particularly the rural public, should be put first. And I think not just the rural public, and those members who perhaps have got urban constituencies and towns and so on, your members are suffering because our electricity prices have doubled in the last 10 years. And that doubling, you've been told that it's because of gas prices. Yes, it's because gas is having to be used to support the wind. If you didn't have the wind as basically a second grid, you wouldn't have to use as much gas, and you wouldn't have to use it in the same, the inefficient way that it is being used now. So there is a cost for all of us. And one of the reasons we react so strongly to the whole issue of community benefits is basically that it's a way of avoiding this point that we were all promised from wind energy lower electricity prices. And we're not getting them. And the other thing is, it's a way of avoiding compensating those people who have been most badly affected. Those who live closest to the turbines are obviously the ones who must be compensated. That's common law, and that is not happening either.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. We shall be hoping to, we shall be producing a draft probably towards the end of the year. Really. Yep. So you will have a chance to look at it. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your ongoing support and contributions.
There's a copy of that statement by the estate agent. Pass that round.
Okay, members, the next group to talk to us is NIRIC, and I'm very aware of the time, members. I think if we could questions from... Okay, yes, good idea. If we quickly do correspondence when the NIRIC group, you come forward and you can, if you want to take your seat, we just very quickly go through the necessary bits. At page 498, members, you have correspondence, items of correspondence there. Just one item I want to consult with you is on page 499. The Historic Royal Palaces has written to all committees, I think, including ourselves, to request to brief us regarding future plans for Hillsborough Castle. I suppose we do have one remit, and that's on heritage, built and natural heritage. Although I'm not too sure what benefit we may well have from a briefing from them about what they're going to do. Up to members. I know they have written to ETI committee, and the ETI committee, not ETI committee, the DEL committee, is going back to ask them, what specific areas they want to talk to the committee of ETI. And the rest for members to note if you're content to do so.
Content to note.
Content to note. What about the request to brief us on their this is on their future plan. I suppose this is perhaps a bit of a PR exercise because of the controversy about Praxis being moved out of the Castle area.
So why not give them a moment in the sun?
Give them a minute.
Moment in the sun. Let them come and brief us. Hmm?
Members content with that? We arrange. Yeah. Or would you want to go for a visit?
There's a better idea.
Want to go for a visit of Hillsborough Castle? And
Chair, I just have to figure out what's its relevance to our committee. Our job is to scrutinise the Department of Environment.
The one thing would be a natural and built heritage. So what they're going to, what they want to brief us on. If we go back to them and maybe just suss out what is it they want to brief us on, would that be okay, members? And we'll bring it back. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, our forward work programme is on page 527. Members, are you content to note? Okay.
Yep.
No other business? Anybody?
Just
Any
on the
AOB?
forward work programme, where is the Environment Centre? That is it the South Eastern Regional College? What town is that in?
Newtownards.
Newtownards. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then the next meeting will be the following week, the 6th of November. Same time, same place. Okay, members, if we then move back then to item 19, and we have now members from NIREC. Their briefing paper is at page 493. If I can welcome Mr. Patrick McLaughlin, Mr. Michael Gordon, and Miss Maeve Cormacken. Is that right? Maeve Cormacken. Okay, we have. Oh yes, we have one more person. Yourself.
I'll introduce as I go round, Chair.
Okay, that's fine. We are very tight for time. Can you give us just 5 minutes, because we've probably all read your paper, and then there will be a lot of questions probably to ask you rather than to go through a long presentation.
Okay, Chair, members, thank you for offering us the opportunity to brief the committee again.
Sorry, the briefing paper is 493. Okay, members.
NIREG stands for the Northern Ireland Renewable Industry Group, and we are the voice of the Irish Wind Energy Association and Renewable UK in Northern Ireland. We certainly appreciate your interest in the renewable technology that delivers such a high proportion of our clean electricity in Northern Ireland. I'd like to introduce myself, Patrick McLuhan, Chair of NIREG, Maeve Cormagan, NIREG's Policy and Communications Coordinator, Dr Michael Gordon, Vice Chair of NIREG, and Dr Matthew Cassidy is a NIREG member and also a noise specialist. We intend to make a short presentation today, and we're happy to take questions afterwards. We strongly believe that we have the opportunity to develop a clean, low-carbon future for Northern Ireland, and this committee has a crucial role to play in committing to the vision and strategies that will deliver a more sustainable energy future now and in the coming 12 months. It's widely accepted that our members' projects leave a legacy of benefit, and we look forward to continuing to develop and deliver benefits locally. So I'll hand over to Maeve now for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you again to Chair and Committee. There are a few issues that I'd like to just briefly discuss, and I'm aware that they perhaps weren't within the remit of the inquiry, but they're of crucial importance to the sector at this point in time. Really what we're doing is looking forward to 2015, which is an extremely important year for a number of reasons. Among those, we will have a new single planning policy statement. Within the draft SPPS, we have seen a few areas of concern. The SPPS in a draft form, and I assume in its final form, emphasises sustainable development, and this is a golden thread that we believe is of fundamental importance. We believe it's therefore vital that renewable energy is a particularly core element of our sustainable future. and there should be continue to be a presumption in favour of renewable energy going forward within the final version of the SPPS. Within the SPPS is one particular notable absence which we'd like to bring to the attention of the committee. The local councils will be developing their own development plans going forward. There's no reference to the strategic energy framework anywhere in the draft SPPS. We see this as a major gap, and our understanding is therefore that councils could potentially draft development plans that do not take into account our executive agreed strategic energy framework. We think that this would be a fundamental problem and should be addressed. We'd also briefly like to point out that the renewable sector and wind industry in particular is highlighted in the draft SPPS in terms of community benefit and engagement. We think that the industry is a leader in both these regards, and we would have some objection to being singled out given that we are a leader and we have produced protocols and the best practice guidance for the industry. There are a couple of other issues that my colleague Michael would just raise.
Thank you. In relation to local government reform, obviously 5 months to go, 20 odd weeks. We're keen to focus in on transitionary arrangements. We believe that it's important that planning applications that are currently in the system with the strategic projects team stay there and get closed out, stay with DOE.
Those are Articles 31.
Some of them are Article 31s, yes. Others, I believe, are strategic but not Article 31. Also, that in relation to new applications in the system after the 1st of April next year, in relation to thresholds, that the threshold for wind projects should be 5 megawatts, and above that threshold they should stay with the DOE and not sit with local government. And also that appropriate call-in measures and facilities need to be available to allow the department to call in wind projects where their determination is important for executive priorities and the SEF.
There's one other issue just before I hand over to Patrick to conclude, and we mentioned it in our briefing paper that we submitted last week. Just to give the committee an update, we had raised concerns about resourcing, particularly within NIEA, and the timelines for turnaround of projects. We've subsequently had a productive meeting with the Environment Agency, and we received a letter from them stating that we would seek solutions together. So our issue in our paper had been major delays in applications themselves plus compliance, and we're hoping that these can be resolved. So that was just to update the committee based on our papers.
And as the committee will be aware, there are other significant policies being developed or amended for the renewable energy sector in 2014 to 2017. These include 2 fundamental changes in our energy markets by 2017. And this means a sustained effort on the part of the developers to make sure that projects are operational by the state. The urgency of an efficient planning system is therefore compounded. And in conclusion, the renewables industry has delivered a lower carbon electricity, hundreds of jobs and millions of pounds of local investment in Northern Ireland. This is a direct success of a clear government vision and a strategy and also a political will. Targets work, but they need full political commitment. We ask this committee to take an active interest in the Strategic Energy Framework Review, the single planning policy statements and all other renewables related policy to ensure that the long-term future of our environment remains a government priority. We would urge that all such policy is based on robust, credible, consistent and peer-reviewed evidence. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think you were here when the previous group talked to us, the Windwatch group.
We were outside.
You were outside, okay.
Yeah.
Were you able to listen to some of their comments?
Well, I didn't.
I got a little bit at the end.
Okay, okay. They mentioned a lot of issues about legality, whether the EU directive and the UK Renewable Action Plan, valid. I think those things maybe we would should talk to the department. But they mentioned a lot about noise level, about distance level, whether the issue as guideline it's really up to date. They're talking about 2 kilometres, 2 kilometres, that's right. Setback distance should be the right distance. That's certainly a lot of issues, mostly about noise, about flicker distance, shadow flicker, low frequency noise, not compliant with methods, whether people their claims of carbon reductions and community benefits are being tested. So, I mean, can you, in general, respond to those questions? I know I'm just going to ask one large lot of questions, and then you can maybe answer.
I suppose on separation distances, there currently are no statutory limits in relation to separation distance, but the 2 kilometre Scottish indicator that you illustrated, Chair, and maybe let Dr Cassidy just fill in on maybe some information around it and the 3 different levels, Dr Cassidy, of.
Yeah, so in relation to actual separation distance, noise is a separate issue because it's not really relevant, because noise itself is based on nuisance. Okay, so the separation distance itself, you're talking about 500 metres in PPS 18 and 2 kilometres in Scotland guidance itself. 2 kilometres in the Scotland guidance comes about with the spatial awareness. Okay, and in that framework itself, it categorises 3 different categories: the places you can't build wind farms, and also places where you can build wind farms, but that 2 kilometre one comes into the one where there's actually areas of significant interest, and you can't build wind farms within 2 kilometres of villages and towns and things like that. But that's not in relation to noise, that's actually in relation to landscape and visual purposes. In relation to noise, it's really about the level of noise that is permitted to not cause disturbance, and that's where the limits come in.
And that Skyline seem to be out of date. Would you agree with that? That needs to be reviewed.
The guidelines themselves, ETSU R97, as you refer to, the fundamental principles of that are still as valid today as they've always been, because they're based on a set of limits. In terms of actual issues with ETSU that have been identified over the years, these have been now addressed in the Good Practice Guide, which I'm sure you've heard about previously. Because the Good Practice Guide actually defines a methodology to predict the levels of noise, which wasn't in ETSU itself. But the principles of ETSU in terms of actual levels and limits that are permissible, there has to be a reasonable balance in terms of protecting residential amenity, but not unreasonably restricting development. So the 2 of those documents, they go hand in hand at actually providing a robust assessment and protecting residential amenity.
On carbon, Chair?
I'm assuming that it was based on actual carbon emission reductions. We included a figure in our briefing notes, which was 628,000 tonnes of CO2 savings in Northern Ireland in 2013-14. The calculation behind that includes the number of megawatts of renewable energy installed, multiplied by the average capacity factor, includes the average savings of CO2 per megawatt, which is based on a DEC figure. I can send through the exact calculation afterwards. I may not have included it,
that would be useful.
but I can send that through.
Yeah.
But it's a standard figure that we would use as it's used throughout the UK, and it's based on calculations that we've taken primarily from DEC as well as installed capacity.
You also said almost 1/5 of Northern Ireland's electricity, that's from April 2013 to March 2014 now, came from renewable sources.
It did. You'll obviously be very aware that the targets contained within the programme for government are 20% of our electricity consumed from renewable resources by 2015, which is next year. We've hit 19.5%, which we think is a great success. And of that, almost 94% came from onshore wind. We obviously have our 2020 targets, which we would very much recommend we don't lose sight of at this point, particularly given that
35%, is that right?
It's 35% reduction in greenhouse gases, but there's a 40% renewables target. And the Strategic Energy Framework is currently being a cost-benefit analysis being carried out at the minute by DETI in preparation for a mid-term review of the SEF next year. And we would really encourage this committee to take an active interest in the Strategic Energy Framework review, because we believe that the 40% targets are absolutely achievable by 2020 with the right commitment in place, and any watering down of those targets would be a really bad signal for investment and just for Northern Ireland generally. So that's a bit of a plea on our side in terms of the committee and the Strategic Energy Framework. Today, before I left the office, I did a quick check, and 29% of our electricity is coming from wind today. It was 32% yesterday, and the day before, all island, because we're in an all-island system, it was 44%. You may have seen something in the UK press on Tuesday, and they were very pleased with themselves that 24% of their electricity was coming from renewables. They were very pleased with themselves. We're regularly hitting 30–40% in Northern Ireland. So it's working, and it's a substantial part of our electricity mix at the moment.
What about the accusation that we are all subsidising wind energy? And we have not seen, as I said, in the last 10 years, a decrease in energy prices, electricity prices.
There is a support system in place to encourage low carbon generation, and that's effectively to try and get generation into place before it becomes too late, effectively. The support system up until now has been called the Renewables Obligation, and it will be changing. It is changing actually already throughout the UK. Northern Ireland's going to see that change to a different support system in 2017.
Is the ROCs?
The ROCs will change to a contract for difference, which we're calling a CFD. There are figures, there are costs, obviously, but just to kind of, I suppose, give some alternative figures. There was Ofgem in 2011 and 12 estimated that the cost of low carbon per household was 3.2p per day, which works out at about £12 a year. So that's figures from a few years ago. We've done our own research that says the cost of reaching Northern Ireland's 2020 targets there will be a cost. It'll be about £7 per year per consumer bill. And would also like to point out that between 2004 and 2011, and this is a DEC figure, the average household energy bills doubled, and 85% of that was the cost of gas, the rise in the cost of gas. So there is a cost, but we believe it's a very minimal cost based on the benefits. And you also mentioned the legality of...
Yes.
And I was assuming that was the Aarhus.
The Aarhus Convention, saying yes.
Which there were two cases. There was an Irish case and then a UK ruling which upheld more or less the Irish judgment, so they both more or less say the same thing, effectively that the future national renewable energy action plans should be consulted on in such a way to comply with the convention. But the ruling, so it didn't affect the current one, but future ones, and the ruling also specifically noted that the NREAP is not a planning document, and the committee rejected a number of challenges made against relevant UK and Scottish Government policy documents, and they also rejected a specific claim on a wind farm application. So all the relevant material policies and processes were shown to be compliant with the directive, and the recommendations that came out would affect future rulings. So I suppose that's, again, I'm not a legal expert, but if you wanted more information on that, I would be happy to send some more through.
Yes, that would be useful. Yes. Yes, we did, that's right. We did take legal advice on that afterwards. Because I think it was Mr. Mullen raised that issue with us. And what was the legal advice that we have, that UK government has not breached anything?
Yes, yes, yes. It is in the cover.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions, Barry?
Thank you, Chair. Just draw attention to guidance protocols developed by local government authorities in my area, you might say, or part of the world. Omagh, Strabane and Fermanagh councils have developed guidance proposals on community benefits from wind energy for host communities. Just wondering, does NIREG have a clear understanding of what these guidance protocols are, what these suggestions are, and might NIREG review its policy on community benefits to reflect the protocol proposals coming from Omagh, Strabane and Fermanagh councils?
I was aware that there'd been, certainly in draft form, protocols from 2 council areas. In the committee, we'll know that last year we published a community commitment protocol. That was last January. And it was kind of based on the situation at the time. And we reviewed that this year, and we produced a best practice guidance, which we didn't want to focus specifically and solely on community benefits, because there's an awful lot more to communities than a community benefits scheme. There's an awful lot that needs to be done in terms of engagement and talking to and early consultation and all these other issues. So the good practice guidance covered a whole range of issues and included recommendations on early engagement and how to engage. And as I said before, I think that the wind industry leads by a good example when it comes to engagement particularly. Our recommendations in terms of community benefit reiterated our previous recommendations, was that there should be a minimum threshold, but we also then went further and recommended higher levels of community benefits where possible. But it is something that we've always said and will continue to say, that no 2 projects are the same and no 2 communities are the same, and so we didn't feel it was appropriate to have a flat rate for every single project out there. And also, I suppose, I'd point out that there's a very significant rates increase coming down the line. At the minute, the rateable levels for wind farms is £4,000 a megawatt. We're expecting that to increase by up to 800% on the 1st of April next year. So there's going to be a significant financial difference in terms of the local authority income from wind farms and individual wind turbines. As of April.
That June guidance document that Maeve's referring to also recommends that our member developers provide the opportunity for interested communities to discuss with said developers the joint ownership or potential for joint ownership of wind farm schemes. So even in the members' own area, I as Gaelectric, which is my day job, we have 2 wind farms currently under construction there, and are rolling out two very good community benefit funds in the area. So you can see it on the ground, and it's fantastic to watch communities benefit from something that is spinning away in the background, generating electricity, and also providing that much needed support to local communities, and especially in these austere times.
Well, we met with a group, we had lunch with members of that group about community benefit, that, the community centre certainly get benefit out of it. And,
I'm interested in the figures because, it has been suggested to me that this figure of £1,000 per megawatt, that some companies offer £5,000 per megawatt, and whether this is right or not, Patrick, I'm not sure, but it refers to Dunbeg. It says that over the 25-year lifespan of the project, that really you're just talking about £567 per megawatt, which would be below the NIRIG best practice guidelines.
It's maybe not just as up to date, member, in the sense that Dunbeg, which is just about to be commissioned, 42 megawatt scheme, fantastic opportunity for us as a company. It will offer over £1 million a year. It's at £1,000 per megawatt.
Thank you.
Cahill?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. You're welcome back, Maeve.
Thank you, Cahill.
Can I have a few questions about Polly Neal wind farm? Can I be answered questions on that, please? Obviously, it's down my own way, and I've been liaising with the community, but I'm interested in this here because I've heard a few wee things on the grapevine. I just maybe seek some clarity, if I may, please, and it's in relation to the community benefit issue. See, in terms of the process, obviously, you're going to comply with it. It's 500 metres in terms of SPPS. Any take out away leave on ground, right? Can you talk me through your process? I mean, is it that, have you talked to any landowners yet, or offered any contracts or any agreements? No, you don't have to get into the detail of them, right? Has there been any contracts signed with people in that area inside the 500 metre?
And on the Tullyneal application, yes, there would be landowners that own land within the 500 metres, perhaps even 1 metre from a turbine, obviously, because they're going to have a turbine located on their land. So that would be fact.
And they've signed up already contracts for years.
Yes, they would be in a financial agreement.
and through advance agreement through it's like
even before we submit the plan application, we would have all those financial agreements in place.
Right, and obviously that's a confidentiality agreement, is it?
They're confidential.
Okay, and I mean, so basic. Because the reason why I'm asking this question is, say, then it's a question whether the people are happy enough, but at the end of the day, it sort of flies in the face of the policy. You know what I mean? Because it's supposed to be within wind farms, supposed to be within 500 metres of it. Is that correct? Yes.
Well, there's no set separation distance. You know, we.
Well, I mean, you see, this is a whole. No, Chair. We're at this now long enough. I mean, because there's no point in having the PPS 18 policy then if there's. I mean, and that's something we at the end of this report we will certainly be looking at. I'm just trying to tease it out, but it's grand. No, that's 100%. See in terms of the marketing strategy, because I mean I've read it, and obviously there's genuine concerns from people up there about price of house and all, you know, deflation and everything else. Your marketing strategy say you reckon that there wouldn't be an issue in relation to house prices falling. I mean, have you? I mean, specifically.
Exactly, and we've been asked that a number of times by the same individual at Tullyneal, and you know, all the academic research published would state that there is, and even abroad, that there's no conclusive evidence to suggest that wind farms have a devaluation effect on house prices.
And just following on from that, Patrick, because I mean it is a serious issue, and it's local to myself, so because I've been asked these questions. See in terms, because I wouldn't imagine anybody would actually go and buy a house if they knew that six number of wind turbines. Yeah,
hopefully.
It's not. I mean, so I'm just wondering in terms of you're putting your brochure to say that it's not. It wouldn't impact all the research, but still in all, if I went to any person went, well, let's say not any, but a number of people, bar they were getting for £1,000, that they wouldn't go to an estate agent and buy a house.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm just trying to tease out how
well, at Tullyneal in particular, a great example, because we were reviewed by the Advertising Standards Authority, and our literature that we had circulated at the first day we went to the community to seek their opinion, a community consultation event, and the Advertising Standards Authority came back to say, you know, give us a clean bill of health in relation to what we had published. And again, last year there was a claim made, I think, by an anti-wind farm group that proximity to wind farms and nearby houses, you know, there was a direct impact on price and causing the price to fall, but the ASA ruled that was misleading and couldn't be substantiated.
I recall seeing something about house prices dropping, and that there should be a policy, or some country has a policy to ask developer to compensate for the price drop.
I'm a chartered surveyor myself, and you know, you have to take so much into context about the local housing market, condition of the house, desirability, proximity to schools, education, all of this. So there are a myriad of issues that have to be.
So other than them general things you've outlined, Patrick, I'm looking at. I just want to tease this out here, because I mean, in reality, I would say 99% of the population would not buy a house. Do you mean?
I think it's fair to say, sorry, Carl.
I mean, my experience.
Well, fair enough. But there was a study that was carried out earlier this year, and it was in the States. I think that's the most recent that I have access to. And I know that you're talking about 99% in your constituency, what you think, but there was 51,000 households and houses surveyed in America earlier this year, and they were closer to wind turbines than any previous studies that have been carried out. And just the direct quote is, regardless of model specification, we find no statistical evidence that home values near turbines were affected in the post-construction, post-announcement or pre-construction period. So, I mean, I can send that link through to you. I think it's important to base it on the statistical research that's been done and that's out there.
I could argue the point that America's not here, let's be honest with you, but I'm not getting into it.
Well, there's UK studies as well.
Well, I could argue then.
Just to give you one point.
I could argue some parts of the UK is not here either, but the reality is, what I'm saying to you is,
be careful.
In terms of the terms of reference you're using, right, Patrick, and you've outlined some on there, realistically, and the members, I'd like any other member to argue this point, that I would know that any person there would go and buy a house, you know, in the like even 1 or 10 metres.
Well, to give you some context, our Cornhill wind farm 6 turbine scheme on the outskirts of Belfast, very visible to people flying in and out, etc. Just about 2 months after it was commissioned, there was a house that actually had increased in value through a bidding process at the very bottom of the lane to the wind farm, and has full sight of at least 4 of the turbines, and it sold for higher than it was being marketed. So that's my own direct experience. I have no more to give you, member, unfortunately.
That's grand, but I think it certainly does instill confidence in the communities. Let's be realistic.
Well,
the very fact that you've also said that you've already, and it's up to the company, you've signed contracts already. The very fact that we have guidelines on the PPS 18 here, 500 metres for wind farms, and that basically they're not worth the paper they wrote on. Let's be honest with it. But just one other point.
Oh, sorry. I would again come back to you and say that we'd like to make sure that the policies that are out there are based on robust, credible, peer-reviewed evidence. All we can do is provide through to you the evidence that we find.
And I'm not arguing.
And as long as we keep the policies based on those, that's all we're keen to see.
I'm mindful of your opening comment in terms of the PPS, this SPPS. You know what I mean? You're looking at the policy there, and you feel because of the local area plans, there may not be strategically there room for this kind of development. I'm concerned with that. I'm also mindful of the fact that we're using the PPS 18 that nobody's adhering to, because the very fact there's contracts already been signed. But you've answered the question. One other question just for yourself, Patrick. In terms of Galactic, in terms of, is there anywhere else on the island that you know of that a family has left any of the sites?
Yes.
Okay.
One question.
Our Screen wind farm, 2 turbine site down in County Roscommon.
For the obviously just
Mr. and Mrs. Keane decided to leave.
Right, okay.
And that was played out to the extreme in the southern media, and our offer still stands to Mr. and Mrs. Keane. They decided not to take us up on that, unfortunately, and decided to move out of their property.
Right, okay.
Which is incidentally more than 700 metres away from the nearest turbine.
And the reason why I'm asking all these questions, because obviously we won't complete a report. What we've heard from both sides here, and I'm caught in the middle of it because we, as a party, we've supported renewable energy and still stick by it. But there's certainly concerns about, one for me is whether the 40% target is realistic and achievable. But
absolutely.
That's now just one final question in terms of the ATSU or 97, because we're hearing here, and we had an acoustics expert in here in relation to it. You're saying there's now it's been reviewed, or it needs reviewed. Well, sorry, I didn't pick up what you. Have you answered that question?
What's come in the past here at the committee meetings is that I think the environmental health, highlighted should be reviewed. I think your acoustic experts has said it's been reviewed. The way of looking at that is that the basic principles of that are a set of limits, okay? And actually those limits are still applicable based on legislation and guidance out there. ETSU itself has been endorsed by all regions of the UK, as well as a good practice guide too. So from our perspective, it doesn't need reviewed. But the other way of looking at this as well is that wind farms that go to appeal or public inquiries, ETSU does get reviewed all the time. It does, it gets questioned, gets open to question. And this is why, you've got the good practice guide out there now to help on that. And those issues have been identified, as I said earlier on, about how do you predict noise from the wind farm itself, how do you deal with other characters of noise. And this is why these things have come about, the good practice guide, for instance.
Okay, no, that's all right. I just...
But they're arguing the level set is far too low.
Yeah. No,
that's their argument. So would you agree with that?
In relation to the actual levels themselves, that's the opinion of environmental health and others. From our perspective, the actual levels themselves are designed for disturbance, for nuisance, for sleep deprivation. And those figures have come about based on that. And the other way of looking at this is in terms of reasonableness and restricting development. There are people in the population, it is designed for the general population, but there are people who actually are more sensitive to noise than others. So there has to be a balance in that context.
Okay. Alban?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and I'll be very, very brief. Just a couple of questions. One, in relation to 178 megawatts per annum or thereabouts, between 15 and 20. Do you think that's sustainable? That is achievable?
I think with the right, I think it's definitely sustainable, because I think the alternative is not to build them and to be continue to be more and more reliant on fossil fuels. That's basically the calculation that we need to get us to 2020, and the system operator has said that the range of factors, including what demand is going to look like in 2020, that will affect the 40%, but between 1,350 and 1,650 megawatts of installed capacity of renewable energy. And so the 178 is basically taking the time that's left and the distance we have to go.
And this year you've installed what? Is that over 200 megawatts? Or?
No, there was. I think I included that. We included
you have 172 large-scale renewable energy expected to next year in 14. Then below that, you've got 41 megawatts large-scale renewable energy generation connected to date.
We included that figure really as an illustration of some of the other challenges beyond the remit of this committee and this inquiry. There is a major problem with connecting our particularly large, not actually just large scale, large and small renewables developments to the grid, and that applies to wind and solar and other.
So that explains that
discrepancy.
An apparent shortfall.
Yes, and as we said, 2017 is a very important year in terms of market changes, and there is a real push to get connected for 2017. Grid is one of our
just
challenges.
One final point in relation to local government reform, which has been central to the work of this committee. You have said that we believe that any live wind farm applications at the time of transition should be concluded by the strategic projects team at DOE headquarters. In other words, those that are in the system should be completed by the strategic team. What about those that would be those applications, later applications, outside that time? Are you saying they should remain, or you just have
ideally, yes. Ideally, yes. A 5 megawatt threshold. Everything above 5 megawatts after the 1st of April would be.
So let me just paraphrase what you're saying. You're saying, look, this is very important. Got to get this right. The strategic team has got the expertise, etc., etc. It would not be an efficient way of doing things if you go to the local councils, because they have to relearn everything, and it's better to keep these applications with the strategic team at headquarters. Is that right?
That's correct.
That would be the thrust of our consultation response to SPPS.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Lot Morrow.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your briefing. Very brief, because some of the issues have already been touched here and there. In relation to the saturation, we've been shown maps here today that show the density of it right around Northern Ireland, and I see here that you have 19 applications that 17 you're still waiting for a decision on. What way have they been dispersed across?
I'm assuming you've seen the small scale single turbine map and the large wind farm development map, well, I mean, and other colleagues happy to have them jump in, but DEDI have implemented a good support programme for single turbines. It's generous, and it's based on diversifying rural income. So there has been a real upswing in the number of single wind farm or single turbine applications. I don't think any of my colleagues who work in that kind of area would question me when I say that I don't think that'll be built out. There's been a grid connection costs for single turbines have increased rapidly, and that's one of the big challenges. So I wouldn't assume that all of those, or even the major part of those single turbines, will be built out. In terms of large-scale developments generally, there's a whole range of...
You're 19, or the 19 that's talked about here, the wind farms.
They're the large scale,
Can you comment on that?
Yeah. There's a whole series of constraints that affect where a wind farm can be built, and the factors, there's a huge number of factors ranging from the obvious wind speed to whether it's in an ASSI or whether it's within a certain distance of an overhead line, or the list of factors goes on, and the policy states that these constraints will be taken into account. So the wind farm applications are for those areas where it's possible to build them, where the policy says it's possible to build them. The 19 and 17, that was one of our, I suppose, resourcing issues, where we said that as in the last 18 months or so, there's been 19 applications outstanding, and we're just aware that the programme for government targets were for...
Maeve, can you speak up a little bit?
Sorry, of course.
Very large room.
Yeah.
Yes.
The 17 from 19 figure was a reference to the fact that an awful lot of the applications that have gone forward in the last 18 months haven't been turned around within a 6-month target, which is, we understand, the programme for government. But I'm not sure if any of my colleagues want to step in.
Yeah, just in relation to the dispersal of the 17, there are some new sites, but it's fair to say that some of them are applications for extensions to existing sites. You mentioned saturation. I think you're probably referring to the landscape and visual impact side of things in particular.
County Tyrone and places like that.
Yeah, I mean that is challenging. Obviously, the planning judgments need to be made there. There are two sides to the argument. One is that indeed it is saturation, and the other is that it's consolidation. And there are two sides of the same coin.
Sort of half glass half empty or half full, is it?
Yeah, and obviously may have mentioned the obvious in that the applications are submitted in locations where the wind speed is highest, and you have the obvious coincidence between the highest wind speeds and the highest landscapes. So those are the constraints that we work within. Planning judgments need to be made. You know, I think something that is worth recording today is that there is no free-for-all in planning. It's not easy to get planning permission for a wind farm. It is quite challenging, and that's why it takes quite a long time to get planning permission for wind farms. So I'm sure in your discussions with the department that's been the feedback as well. Policy is operated in such a way that there are judgments made, and where there are applications that shouldn't be approved, they're not approved. And there are examples of refusals as well, and applications have been withdrawn where it looked like applications would be refused. So it's not a free-for-all. Not every application that gets submitted gets approved.
Would you like to comment in relation to just around the economics of it, Chair? I think, you know, this has all been sold on the premise that we're going to have cheaper energy and costs, but you know, the households don't see that coming through yet, or.
I don't know. I don't think. Sorry, it's just I'm getting thirsty. I don't know that it's really fair to say that we've been sold. The population has been sold cheaper energy. I think the argument for sustainable energy goes way beyond prices, and it is about a sustainable future. I mentioned earlier that there are costs to developing a new energy system, because we are fundamentally in the middle of a major reshift and restructuring of our entire energy system. You know, that happened when we were electrified, actually 100 odd years ago. It's happening again, and there's challenges that we're facing because there's a grid that suddenly has to cope with different demands being made of it. There's people that are now seeing their sources of energy, whereas before, if they didn't live near Ballylumford or they didn't live near Kilroot, they didn't see where their energy came from. They switched on the light and that was that. So we're in a period of major flux, and there's challenges to be dealt with. We're also unavoidably facing higher fossil fuel prices. The trend is up. It has been upwards for a very long time. There was a study carried out a few years ago which says that the wholesale cost of electricity, if we hit our 2020 targets, the wholesale cost of electricity in the all-island market will fall by 11.5% as a result of renewable energy. In the long term, I don't think we can afford not to develop these sources of energy, because we will be reliant on fossil fuels that do increase in price.
But you also say that when you talk about fossil fuels, and you do say here that you have €1 billion, I think it is, of savings in the last 5 years.
Yeah, as a result of renewables. Now that was a figure carried out, a figure that I pulled from the Sustainable Energy Authority Ireland report. So I don't have equivalent figures for Northern Ireland alone. I'm afraid that they were Ireland figures, but there was just an example.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We have also heard, actually, from Mrs. Walsh, the Special Advisor for the report, that some people may use second-hand reconditioned turbines. Would the industry do that? Would you do?
Well, generally, large-scale wind farm sites, they would be brand new machines specifically designed and constructed for that site, Chair, where you see the usage of the second-hand reconditioned technology and asset is on the small-scale to medium-scale single turbine site. Right. And they're reconditioned to a very high standard. If they weren't, they wouldn't be allowed to connect to the grid, for example. And they should be scrutinised from a warranty perspective, as any asset would be in relation to technology warranty and availability. So they should be of good condition generally.
Okay, but they would not have the benefit of newer technology to reduce noise and.
It would depend on. I mean, a reconditioned turbine doesn't necessarily mean it's any better or any worse than a new turbine. I mean, if it's properly fitted, it shouldn't be any noisier. And if it's noisy, that implies that it hasn't been fitted properly and it's not particularly efficient. So there's no real benefit to having a noisy reconditioned turbine. And in terms of, I don't know how many are being used, but they are cheaper, and I suspect that there's probably a number of individuals who are interested in putting up a turbine on their land are looking at those as cheaper options.
And all developers that receive a planning permission are subject to post-construction noise monitoring surveys, so we all have to undertake these noise surveys after the wind farm has been constructed, and generally the experience is that it's actually better off than was proposed. I don't know, Michael, if you want to fill in on that. Yeah,
just from experience of the noise side of things, there are lots of assumptions made in the prediction of noise. And often when the post-commissioning noise surveys are undertaken, they find that the predictions were actually overstated. So the actual noise is less than the noise which was predicted through the noise impact assessment.
Okay, and you're saying when 2017 comes, you will see a drop in renewable energy applications because of the change in policy?
Well, because it takes so long to get from thinking about a wind farm to a wind farm in the ground, 5, 7, 10 years, we're at this point in time, there's a lot of uncertainty as to what 2017 looks like. So there's wind farms that have planning permission wanting to make sure they connect before 2017 so they know exactly what the returns will be. There's projects that are still in planning that would really like to get through planning and get connected to the grid. Obviously that's dependent on regulatory and NIE work before 2017. By the time 2017 actually comes around, we'll know, fingers crossed, we'll know what the support system will look like, what the market will look like, and hopefully by 2017 we will have a very good idea about what our 2030 targets need to be. So at that point we'll be looking beyond 2020 and into 2030. So at this point in time there's a lot of uncertainty as to what the level of applications may be. By 2017 we'll know something different in terms of numbers of applications.
Uncertainty is key from an investor's perspective, Chair, in the sense that they want to see what the future looks like and what revenue streams are going to appear to them to be, and they can land on that basis and price that debt accordingly. Where there is uncertainty and a little bit of turbulence or greyness around what may be coming down the line, investors do take a step back. It's across all industries, and they say, well, we'll just watch what's happening here. And it's up to us as an industry association to get involved and to be as proactive as possible to get as much information for our members as possible. So we're confident that there will be obviously a market there for us post 2017. We may not know what that looks like just yet. We hope to early next year. But the certainty that up to 2017 gives our investors the confidence they need to keep investing.
Okay, Well, thank you very much indeed. And I presume you have responded to the consultation on SPBS? Yeah, just to raise your points. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Very nice to meet you all again. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, it's a very long meeting. Thank you very much for your patience. We'll see you not next week, but the week after. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Chair, just can we speak in closed session for 1 minute, please?
Yeah, okay.